Welcome everyone to Paranormal M. Thank you for joining me for another night of strange and unexplained stories. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel, and if you like the stories in this video, don't forget to give it a like. Our first story tonight takes us inside a massive distribution warehouse, where a security guard began hearing footsteps in a place where nobody should have been. What makes it even stranger is that it kept happening at the same time, on the same day. So relax, listen closely, and let the story begin. I hope you all sleep well tonight. I've held on to this for a little over a year and a half now. My wife knows something happened at that warehouse. She doesn't know the details, but she knows enough to stop asking. She sees it when I wake up at 3:12 in the morning, just staring into the dark like I'm waiting for something to move. At first, she used to touch my shoulder and ask if I was okay. Now she just lies still beside me. And honestly, I think part of her has decided that whatever happened is something she doesn't really want pulled into the light. I let her believe that's for the best. Maybe it is. The job was overnight security at a freight storage facility about 20 minutes outside town. Big place. Somewhere around 300,000 square feet, maybe more. The kind of building that felt less like a warehouse and more like a hollowed-out city. Long rows of shelving, concrete floors, loading docks, old inventory stacked in quiet corners nobody visited anymore. At night, it changed. During the day, it was forklifts and voices and backup alarms. But after midnight, it became something else entirely. The dark in there wasn't empty. That's the only way I know how to say it. It felt packed in, heavy, like it had been waiting all day for everyone to leave so it could stretch itself out again. My shift ran from 10 at night to 6 in the morning, 5 nights a week. Nothing complicated. I walked the perimeter every hour and a half, checked doors, made sure locks were secure, wrote down anything strange, and tried not to fall asleep in the little security office by the loading bay. For the first couple of weeks, it was exactly what you'd expect. Boring. I drank terrible vending machine coffee, listened to old radio shows through one earbud, and filled out reports that basically said, "Nothing happened," over and over again. Then the third Monday night came. Technically Tuesday morning, I guess. I was doing my 2 a.m. round and had just passed one of the side exits when I heard footsteps. They were coming from row 19. That was one of the old storage rows toward the far end of the building. Nobody used it much. The lights back there had been flickering since before I started, and half of them didn't work at all. The shelves held discontinued stock, damaged pallets, boxes nobody seemed responsible for anymore. I stopped and listened. The footsteps stopped too. I called out, said I was security, told whoever was there that the building was monitored and they needed to show themselves. Nothing. So I aimed my flashlight down the row. The beam only made it so far. It caught the edges of cardboard boxes, steel beams, plastic wrap hanging from pallets. Past that, everything just disappeared. I stood there for a while, listening. No movement, no voice, no footsteps. I told myself it was probably a raccoon, or the building settling, or my own nerves making music out of silence. I logged it as possible animal activity and finished the round. A week later, same night, same time, same row. Footsteps again. But this time, I noticed something that made my skin go cold. They matched me. When I walked, they walked. When I stopped, they stopped. I stood there with one foot still half raised, barely breathing, and whatever was back in row 19 went completely still at the exact same moment. I remember checking my watch because I needed something normal to look at. 2:08 a.m. I stood there for almost 5 minutes. 5 minutes in a warehouse that suddenly felt too large and too quiet. waiting for something hidden in the dark to make the first move. Then I heard breathing. Not scratching, not pipes, not air moving through vents. Breathing. Slow, careful, controlled. The kind of breathing a person makes when they are trying very hard not to be heard. I called my supervisor, Marlon. He came down from the office, annoyed at first, but that changed when he saw my face. We searched that entire row together, every shelf, every gap between pallets, every corner where someone could crouch. There was nothing there. No person, no animal, no open door, no sign that anyone had been inside. But as we were walking back, Marlon said something under his breath. He said, "Monday night again." I asked him what that meant. He didn't answer. He just kept walking. That was the beginning of the end for me. I stayed another few weeks, but I never worked another Monday night. I called in sick every time. I know how that sounds, but I didn't care. Something about that place had noticed me, or I had noticed it, and I wanted no part of whatever came next. By the end of the month, I quit. No dramatic explanation, no long email. I just told HR the hours weren't working for me anymore. About 4 months later, I saw the guy who replaced me. His name was Nolan, I think. Or maybe Nolan. I only met him once when I came in to drop off my badge. I ran into him at a convenience store off the highway, 2 towns away. At first, I barely recognized him. He looked ruined. Not tired in the normal way. Not rough week tired. It was deeper than that. The kind of exhaustion that settles behind the eyes. The kind that comes from sleeping, but never resting. He recognized me right away. Before I could even say hello, he stepped close, grabbed my sleeve, and asked me one question. "Did it stop for you after you left?" I just stared at him. Then he said, quieter this time, "On Monday nights. Did it stop following you home?" I still think about that. I think about it more than I want to admit. I never went back to that warehouse. I don't drive that road anymore. I moved my family across the state last year and told my wife it was because of a better work opportunity. That wasn't the real reason. The real reason was distance. I needed miles between me and that building. But the thing is, I still wake up at 3:12 sometimes. Always on Tuesday morning. Always with my heart pounding. Always with the feeling that somewhere nearby, just outside the edge of the room, something has stopped moving because I stopped moving. I don't know what was in row 19. I don't know why it came on that night, at that hour. I don't know what happened to Nolan. I've thought about finding him. I've thought about asking if he's okay. But what would I even say? "Hey, did the footsteps ever leave you alone?" That sounds insane until it happens to you. So I'm saying this here because I need to know if anyone else has experienced something like it. A job, a building, a room, a road. Something that only happened at a certain time, on a certain day, like it was keeping an appointment. Because I've started collecting stories like mine, and there are more than you'd think. Some things don't explain themselves. They just come back on schedule. This happened sometime during the height of COVID, around 2020 or 2021. I can't remember the exact month, but I know it was during the warmer part of the year. At that point in my life, there wasn't any male figure living with us. My mom wasn't seeing anyone either, so there really shouldn't have been any man in the house. Back then, I was sleeping in the basement. It had a bed, and my computer setup was down there too, so it had kind of become my little space. I never liked sleeping in complete darkness, so whenever I went to bed, I'd leave a few dim lights on across the basement. Not bright enough to keep me awake, just enough so the whole room wasn't swallowed up by the dark. One night, I woke up somewhere around 2:30 or maybe 3 in the morning. At first, I was still half asleep. You know that strange, foggy feeling where you're awake, but your brain hasn't fully caught up yet? I looked toward my desk, and sitting there, in my chair, was a man I had never seen before. He was dressed in a black suit, almost like a tuxedo. It looked neat, fitted, like it had been made for him. He had on a tie, a top hat, and these dark sunglasses that covered his eyes completely. I couldn't really make out much of his face because of them. The weird thing is, I didn't panic right away. I just stared for a second and thought, I must be seeing things. I figured maybe I was exhausted, or maybe I had woken up from a dream and my mind was still filling in shapes in the dark. So I shut my eyes and tried to go back to sleep. But almost immediately, something in me said, no, that was too clear. So I opened my eyes again. I checked the time, then pushed myself up on my elbow and looked back toward the desk, fully expecting the chair to be empty. But he was still there, just sitting there, looking at me. That was when I noticed my computer monitors were on, glowing faintly in the room. I couldn't tell what was on the screens, but the light from them made the whole thing feel even stranger. From what I could see, the man looked white, probably somewhere in his 30s, clean-shaven, maybe close to 6 feet tall. He didn't move. He didn't say anything. He just sat in my chair, facing me. And I know this sounds strange, but even then, I still didn't fully react the way I think most people would. I was scared, but it was like my brain couldn't quite accept what I was seeing. So instead of yelling or running upstairs, I just laid back down and tried to sleep. Somehow, I actually did. When I woke up in the morning, everything seemed normal. There was no sign that anyone had been down there. Nothing was missing. Nothing was moved in any obvious way. But once I was awake and thinking clearly, the fear finally hit me. I kept replaying it in my head, and the more I thought about it, the worse it felt. I avoided the basement for the next few days, because I couldn't shake the image of him sitting at my desk. A few days later, I finally went back down there and checked the sliding glass door in the basement. I wanted to see if it had been locked, and if the security bar was still in place. The bar wasn't there, and the door was unlocked. Now, it's possible my sister or one of her friends had gone through that door sometime after it happened, so I can't say for sure that it was unlocked that night, but seeing it like that definitely didn't make me feel better. I've told a few people this story since then. One person told me she'd heard of other people describing a man who looked almost exactly like that, from completely different places and backgrounds. Someone else pointed out that if it really had been a break-in, it didn't make much sense. Why would someone come in dressed like that, sit at my desk, stare at me, and not take anything? I still don't have an answer. I've never seen him again, and nobody else in my house ever reported seeing him. But I can still picture him clearly. The black suit, the top hat, the sunglasses, and the way he just sat there in the dark, watching me. I moved into that apartment at the beginning of last summer, and honestly, at first, I thought I had found something really special. It was this bright little studio in an old brick building in northern Utah, built sometime in the early 1900s. The place had so much charm. The windows let in this soft, golden light, and there was a mulberry tree growing right outside. I remember picking berries almost every day and thinking, okay, maybe life is finally giving me a peaceful little corner. For a while, it really did feel that way. But then I started noticing the closet. Every time I opened the closet door, this strange feeling would come over me. Not just uneasiness, but the kind of feeling that makes your body go still before your mind even understands why. I tried to brush it off. The building was old, and I've always been sensitive to energy. So I told myself I was probably just picking up on the age of the place. Then I found this old ironing board built into the wall. When I opened it, it felt like something rushed out at me. I know that sounds dramatic, but that's exactly how it felt. The smell coming from it was awful too, heavy and stale, almost rotten. I sprayed it with perfume, shut it, and tried not to think about it again. But things didn't stop. One day, while I was taking a shower, a face appeared in the steam. I froze. After that, I started showering with my eyes closed because I couldn't stand the thought of seeing it again. Then came the footsteps. I would leave my apartment and I'd hear heavy steps right behind me, even when no one was there. Sometimes, inside the apartment, something would touch my feet. Not once or twice, but often. I had a friend named Mira come over, and she was sensitive to this kind of thing too. Before I even told her everything, she said, "Something keeps touching my feet." That chilled me because it had been happening to me too. The strange part was that it didn't seem to bother men in the same way. It felt selective, almost personal. Eventually, I asked another friend, a medium named Celia, to come over. She walked through the place and told me she believed there was some kind of open doorway there, something people had messed with before me. She said it felt like a passageway, like spirits were moving in and out whenever they wanted. She told me very clearly, "I don't think you should stay here." But I had just moved in. I had just signed the lease. Leaving wasn't simple. I called the landlord and begged to be released from it. She finally agreed, but she kept my deposit. It was expensive, but honestly, by then, I was desperate. Around that same time, I found out my downstairs neighbor, Jonah, was going through almost the exact same thing. Dishes rattling in the sink, noises at night, strange figures. He had even taken pictures of things he couldn't explain. I don't think I would have believed any of this if I hadn't lived through it myself. I tried everything. I burned sage and Palo Santo. I put salt across the floors. I hung crosses. I prayed. I had a priest come and bless the apartment with holy water. I slept with holy water on my pillow and sprinkled it around myself at night. I made a selenite grid in the four corners of the studio. I washed the walls with Florida water. Some of it helped, but only for a night. Then everything would start again. Someone at a metaphysical shop told me, "Just stop being afraid. Tell them you don't care." So I tried it. I stood there and said, "I don't care." Almost immediately, I felt something scratch my leg. It didn't leave a mark, but it felt angry. Not playful, not curious. Angry. The nights became unbearable after that. Almost every night around 3 a.m., the dishes in my sink would start rattling. I would wake up at the same time every night and then just lie there, exhausted and terrified, unable to fall back asleep. The air would feel chaotic, like people were fighting in the room with me even though I was alone. I would yell, "Stop!" but it never listened. One night, I felt my body floating above itself. It was strange because it didn't feel frightening in the moment. It felt almost peaceful, even euphoric. Something similar had happened to me once years earlier in a hotel in Hawaii, but I still don't really know what to call it. Some people say that's astral projection. I don't know. I only know what I felt. The final breaking point came when I saw something outside my second-story window. It was the middle of the night, around 3 a.m., and there was this pale face outside the glass. It looked almost like someone had thrown a white sheet over their head and climbed a ladder just to scare me. But who would do that? Who could even do that? At the same time, something in the room started pulling at my feet and curling my fingers into my palms. I couldn't understand why anything would want to do that to me. But after that, It started happening night after night. I was barely sleeping. I couldn't function at work. I started telling coworkers what was going on, and some of them didn't believe me. That hurt almost as much as the haunting itself, because I was already exhausted and scared, and then I had to carry the shame of not being believed too. Eventually, one coworker connected me with a group of spiritists. They practiced a Brazilian form of Christianity and said they had dealt with things like this before. I went to their home and they prayed over me and tried to communicate with whatever was attached. During that experience, I saw this horrible, bloody face in my mind. It terrified me. By then, I was falling apart. I was depressed, sleep-deprived, and barely holding on to my job. Things didn't truly improve until I left the apartment completely. I moved into my car for a while, which was its own kind of hardship, but even that felt safer than staying in that place. I was terrified whatever it was would follow me, but thankfully, it didn't. Eventually, I moved into a brand new building, and everything stopped. No footsteps, no touching, no rattling dishes, no faces in the steam, no waking up every night at 3 a.m. Just quiet. I'm doing much better now, but I still carry the trauma from it. I still have nightmares. I still think about how many people didn't believe me, and how that experience cost me my job and my sense of safety. And I still have so many questions. Why me? Why did it seem to focus on certain people and leave others alone? What kind of spirits were they? Why the footsteps? Why the feet? Why did it move my hands at night? Why would anyone open something like that in a home where other people would eventually have to live? I don't know all the answers. What I do know is that leaving saved me. That apartment taught me that sometimes protection doesn't look like one perfect ritual or one powerful prayer. Sometimes protection looks like listening to your body when it says, "We are not safe here." Sometimes it looks like walking away, even when it costs you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose peace over proof. And now, more than anything, I want to feel safe in my own body again. I want to trust quiet rooms again. I want to know that whatever happened there stayed there. And I want to believe that my life belongs fully to me now. I had just started working security at a property not too far from my apartment. And honestly, the first thing I wanted to know was where the strange spots were. Every site has them. You know, the places people talk about in half-jokes. The places where the light feels too thin, or the air changes when you step inside. They walked me through the patrol route, and at first, nothing seemed too dramatic. There was a dark tunnel down on level -3, where we had to walk all the way to the far end. There was a damp little utility room that smelled like wet concrete and old metal. And then there was the 4th floor. The site itself was a big cluster of buildings wrapped around a plaza. Offices, cafes, a fitness studio, legal offices, all kinds of businesses. A lot of it was connected in one way or another to the courthouse nearby. But the neighborhood around it had history. Heavy history. People called it cursed sometimes, though I'm careful with words like that. It was more like the whole place carried a wound. There had been forced removals, poverty, violence, riots after police nearly killed a local man. Most of the area was half empty, and every quiet street felt like it remembered more than it wanted to say. At first, the creepy parts of the job got to me, but after a while, I got used to them. The tunnel stopped feeling haunted and started feeling like exactly what it was. A dark passage nobody wanted to spend money lighting properly. I've had enough strange experiences in my life to know when my imagination is just throwing shadows on the wall. I can usually talk myself down. But the 4th floor was different. My name there was Neron, or at least that's what most people called me on shift. I mostly kept to myself. The workplace was getting toxic fast. People were tense, management was strange, and I could feel myself already planning my way out. Still, I did my rounds. Every time I reached the 4th floor, something felt off. The hallway always had this sour, sweaty smell, like someone had left gym clothes in a sealed bag for 2 days. Disgusting, yes. Creepy, not exactly. Not at first. There was a lot of downtime on that job, so I started writing horror stories during quiet hours. The funny thing is, most of them were based on things I had actually experienced. But around that time, my writing dried up. I felt blocked, exhausted, irritated. I didn't realize I was already inside the next story. One night, I was walking the 4th floor hallway when I heard footsteps behind me. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to sound like someone was walking at my pace, a few steps back. I stopped. The footsteps stopped too. I told myself it was the acoustics. Long hallway, hard floor, empty building. Sound does strange things in places like that. So later that week, during the day, I tried to recreate it. Same shoes, same hallway, same pace. Nothing. A few weeks after that, I was back on the 4th floor when I heard people coming up the stairs. I could hear their footsteps, and then voices. A conversation, low and muffled, close enough that I expected them to turn the corner any second. Then the voices cut off, just stopped. I looked. No one was there. That was when I started getting that cold little feeling in my stomach, the kind that says, you can explain this if you want, but you don't believe yourself. Meanwhile, things at work were getting worse. I got accused of sleeping on shift and skipping patrols, which wasn't true. It felt like they needed someone new to blame after another guard, a guy with deeply unsettling energy, had been fired. I was already on edge one evening when my shift began. My PTSD was bad that day, and I was angry before I even picked up the radio. During my first patrol, I reached the 4th floor. There they were again. Footsteps behind me. Right behind me. I scanned the checkpoint near the stairs, and just as I did, I heard another set of steps coming from around the corner. They moved toward me, close enough that I braced myself to see someone appear. But no one came. The sound vanished. I didn't try to be brave. I went straight to the elevator and got out of there. A little later, while taking the stairs, I stepped wrong and twisted my ankle badly enough that I couldn't keep doing patrols that night. So I ended up sitting at the lobby desk around 2 a.m, trying to write, even though the words still wouldn't come. The desk faced a wall of security monitors. In front of me, the lobby was all glass, so I could see straight out into the plaza. And that's when I noticed the people. Too many people. Way too many for that hour. At the edge of my vision, the plaza looked busy, like a promenade. Figures moving past the glass, groups crossing from one side to another, people gathering near the entrances. But every time I lifted my head and looked directly outside, they were gone. Empty plaza. Still pavement. Maybe one stray cat moving through like it owned the night. Then I'd look back down at the computer, and the movement would return. A cluster of people. A few shapes walking together. Sometimes what looked like an entire group would collapse into one ordinary person the moment I focused on it. It kept happening. And I remember sitting there with this awful calm feeling, like the Wadi was showing itself to me one last time before I left. Not attacking me, not chasing me, just being seen. The 4th floor felt different from the rest. Something meaner lived in that atmosphere. Or maybe something had settled there because of the company using that space. I don't know. Some places attract the wrong kind of weight. But the plaza felt older, sadder, like the past was replaying itself after midnight, when the suits and court robes were gone. The people who had been pushed out, the workers packed into brutal conditions, the community that had once been alive there, all of it lingering, all of it walking where nobody wanted to look. I had already handed in my resignation by then, thank God, and I knew one thing clearly. I wasn't going back to the 4th floor to investigate. Some doors don't need to be opened. Some hallways tell you enough by following behind you. Okay, I'm going to try to explain this as clearly as I can, even though I know it's going to sound strange. I don't know whether this is some kind of glitch in reality, something supernatural, or just my mind connecting dots too intensely. But lately, it has been happening often enough that I can't just laugh it off anymore. The earliest thing I remember goes back to elementary school. For a while, I had these dreams where I'd see little pieces of the next day. Not memories, not things that had already happened. I mean the next day. It would only be a few seconds at a time, usually a short conversation or a tiny moment in class. But then the next day, it would happen exactly the way I dreamed it. Same words, same voices, same feeling. Eventually, that stopped. I don't know why, and it never really came back in the same way. But there were other odd things when I was younger too. There was this one family member, I'll call her Lena, and when we were outside together, there was this place we used to go. I can barely describe it without feeling ridiculous. There was a winding path, almost like a little spiral slope, and when we went down it, it felt like we had stepped out of normal reality. Suddenly, it was like we were somewhere warm and coastal. I remember sitting on a bench and seeing what looked like the ocean in front of us. It felt like a tropical island, even though that makes no sense. I still don't know what happened there. I don't even know if my brain filled in some impossible memory later, but thinking about it still gives me chills. And Lena, the family member who was with me, has always believed that something followed her after that. She used to say there were dark men watching her or trailing her. Maybe that was just fear talking. Maybe it was coincidence. But when I think back on it now, it doesn't feel harmless. Later, when I had my first apartment, weird things continued in smaller ways. I had smart lights, a voice assistant, all the usual stuff. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, everything would suddenly turn on. Lights, devices, the whole little digital circus. At the time, I brushed it off as tech being tech. A glitch, bad wiring, whatever. But now I'm not so sure. Then there were the stories my mother told me. For a while, when I was staying with her, she told me about things she claimed to see at night. Ghosts, angels, figures standing in the room. I never really believed her. I thought maybe she was dreaming, or maybe stress was getting to her. But one story stuck with me. She said something had left a scratch on my younger half-sister's cheek. I didn't see it myself, so I can't say what really happened. But it's one of those things that sits in the back of your mind and waits. And then there are the things that seem to appear right after I think or talk about them. A few weeks ago, I was trying to get a job at a warehouse, and I was talking to an AI chatbot about how I might use protein drinks or snacks during breaks to keep my energy up. Then, the next time I went to my local supermarket, there was suddenly this huge black shelf right near the entrance, completely filled with protein products. And I swear, I had never seen it there before. I know people miss things. I know stores rearrange shelves. But this thing was big, dark, obvious, and right in the front. It felt like reality had quietly placed it there after hearing me mention it. Then things got even stranger. One Thursday night, I suddenly had this overwhelming urge to find 2 old stuffed animals from my childhood. I hadn't thought about them in years. It felt urgent, almost emotional, like I needed to rescue them somehow. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. The next day, I went for a short walk, and there, on the side of the road, were 2 stuffed animals. 2. Not 1. 2. One looked like one of those popular monkey plushies people were obsessed with for a while, and the other was a yellow tiger that reminded me of a plush someone had shown me months earlier. I just stood there staring at them, because what do you even do with that? It felt too specific to be random. After that, I felt pulled to keep walking, and somehow, all the anxiety and tension I'd been carrying for weeks just lifted. Nothing dramatic happened. No revelation. No lightning bolt. I just walked through the city, and suddenly I felt normal again. Saturday was quiet, but Sunday really got under my skin. I started a brand new game in The Sims 4. Fresh character, fresh save, nothing unusual. And the very first thing my sim did was pick up a book. The title was something like Mara and the Increasingly Impossible Chain of Coincidences. That alone would have been weird enough, but the character's name in the book was basically a blend of my real first name and a fictional name I made up almost a year ago. I just sat there staring at the screen, because at some point, "That's weird" stops being enough of an explanation. And then last night, a podcast I listened to released an episode about WALL-E. Almost at the exact same time the notification came through, I was watching an episode of The Simpsons that had a WALL-E parody in it. Again, maybe it's all coincidence. I know that. I really do. But sometimes, even the weather seems to shift around my plans. Not always. Not in some perfect, magical way. Just enough that I notice. Enough that I start wondering whether my thoughts are somehow lining up with the world around me, or influencing it, or being reflected back at me. And I know how wild that sounds. I know stress can make the mind search for patterns. I know anxiety can make coincidences feel meaningful. I know there are probably ordinary explanations for some of this. But the stuffed animals were real. I touched them. The shelf in the supermarket is real. It's still there. The game, the podcast, the show, the timing. All of that happened. So I don't think I'm hallucinating. I just don't know what I'm experiencing. Maybe it's nothing more than a strange run of coincidences. Maybe my brain is overwhelmed and assigning meaning where there isn't any. Or maybe there's something about reality that I don't understand, and lately it's been tapping on the glass. I don't know, but I'm starting to feel like the world is responding to me in ways it shouldn't. And honestly, after the past few days, I don't know how I'm supposed to ignore that. I grew up in eastern Michigan, in one of those areas where the woods seem to stretch forever, only really interrupted by old roads, patches of farmland, and the occasional farmhouse tucked way back from view. When I was younger, my sister and I spent a lot of time wandering through those woods. We knew the area pretty well, or at least we thought we did. Most of the time, we would hike until we reached this creek, and then we would turn around. That creek always felt like the edge of our little world. But one afternoon, we decided to go farther. We found a fallen tree that stretched across the water, and we used it like a bridge. I remember balancing carefully, watching the creek move beneath us, and then climbing up the bank on the other side. The creek sat down in this wetland basin, so once we got out of it, the ground leveled out for a while. After walking a bit farther, I noticed something strange near the edge of a rise. It was a fenced-off area, surrounded by an old wire fence that had gone rusty with age. Inside, there wasn't much. Just a faded plastic slide, a shed that looked like it was slowly collapsing in on itself, and a scattered mess of metal junk. It had the feeling of a place someone had abandoned years earlier and never looked back at. I climbed over the fence and walked toward the edge of the hill. That was when I saw it. Below me was a paved road, winding through the trees, with cars moving along it like everything was perfectly normal. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I just remember thinking it was kind of cool, like we had finally reached the end of some hidden trail. I stood there for a little while, watching the road, then climbed back over the fence and headed home with my sister. Later, I told my dad about where we had gone. He got serious right away and said that once we crossed the creek, we had been trespassing. He told us not to hike that way again, so we didn't. For years, I didn't really question it. Then, when I was older, curiosity got the better of me. I pulled up a map and tried to figure out exactly where we must have ended up that day. And that's when the whole thing stopped making sense. There shouldn't have been a paved road anywhere near where we were. The land beyond the creek was surrounded by farmland and dirt roads. No winding paved road, no stretch of traffic, nothing that matched what I remembered seeing from that hill. The stranger part is that when I asked my sister Mara if she remembered that hike, she immediately said, "Yeah, I remember ending up by the road." So it wasn't just me. Looking back now, there were other details that don't fit either. There shouldn't have been a hill there, not really. The area is mostly flat, except for the wetland basin around the creek. And that fenced storage area didn't make much sense either. There was no house nearby, no driveway, no obvious reason for a rusted fence, an old shed, a plastic slide, and random junk to be sitting out there. The thing that still bothers me is that I almost walked down the hill toward the road. I remember thinking about it. I just decided it would be annoying to climb all the way back up afterward, so I didn't. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had gone down there. Maybe there's some simple explanation. Maybe the map doesn't show something old, or maybe the land has changed more than I realize. But even now, I can still picture that paved road below us, the cars passing by, and that weird little fenced-off place sitting where it shouldn't have been. And honestly, I still don't know what we found that day. A little bit of backstory. Back in February, someone in my family passed away. It happened so suddenly that I still don't think any of us have fully caught up with it. One moment, he seemed fine, healthy, just part of the normal rhythm of life. Then, almost without warning, he was gone. And lately, as the funeral arrangements have been coming together, a few strange things have started happening around the family. Not dramatic, not movie scene dramatic. Just small things. Odd things. The kind that make you pause and wonder whether you're imagining connections, or whether something gentle is trying to get your attention. My brother, for example, has suddenly been hit with this almost compulsive urge to clean cars. Now, he's always liked detailing cars, so it's not completely out of nowhere. But this has been different. He's gone all in, buying new gear, polishing everything, cleaning any car he can get his hands on. He did my car, and he doesn't even like my car. Then he did my dad's car. Then he went and cleaned my dad's old coupe, which doesn't even run anymore. And the family member who passed, I'll call him Lenny, was really into cars too. He was the type who liked them kept spotless. Clean paint, tidy interior, everything looking looked after. So seeing my brother suddenly pick that up so strongly feels strange. Almost like that little piece of Lenny got passed along somehow. Then there's my mother. A few days ago, she had a dream about him. After that, she suddenly wanted a chair for the porch. She wanted to sit outside, just be out there for a while. And what makes that even stranger is that I'd been feeling almost the exact same pull. For me, it was a rocking chair. Specifically a rocking chair, and for some reason I kept picturing myself wearing bib overalls while sitting in it. The rocking chair thought actually started about a week before Lenny died, but the porch feeling came after. That's not really like me. I'm usually more drawn to the water. I've always thought of myself as more of a sea person than a land person. Sitting on a porch, rocking away like I belong there, isn't normally the kind of thing that calls to me. But lately, it has. And then last night, something else happened. there's this boxed deck of playing cards in my room. It's been sitting on the same shelf for years, resting against a tankard. Nothing special, just one of those objects that becomes part of the room because it's been there so long. Out of nowhere, the cards fell. No one touched them. Nothing bumped the shelf. They just dropped. The first thought that came into my head was, "Did you do that?" Then I thought, "Do something else." But nothing else happened. The strange part is where the cards landed. They fell right beside a pair of headphones. I don't know what connection, if any, the playing cards have. But Lenny was a DJ, so the headphones immediately stood out to me. And these weren't just any headphones either. They were my good ones, the kind that wouldn't look too out of place in a radio studio. They haven't been working for the last few weeks because the cable went bad, but I don't think that part means anything. Those cables break on me about once a year anyway. Still, I keep thinking about it. Maybe I'm connecting dots that don't actually belong together. Maybe the car cleaning and porch sitting could be explained by the weather getting nicer. Maybe grief makes ordinary things feel charged with meaning. But even knowing that, I can't quite brush it off. It all feels too strange, too specific, too quietly timed to ignore. I was staying with a friend in a little cabin outside Brockport, New York, tucked so far back in the woods it felt like the rest of the world had gone quiet. One evening, we decided to take my dog, Lila, for a walk around the property. She's a German Shepherd and livestock guardian mix, so she's not exactly the type to get nervous over nothing. If Lila starts acting strange, I pay attention. We followed a creek that ran through the property and eventually led out toward the road. There was also this narrow little stream branching off from it, running alongside the street. By the time we got there, the light was starting to fade, but we kept walking for a bit. There were guardrails on both sides of the road where the creek passed underneath. We crossed over to look at the other side, but Lila really did not want to leave that spot. She kept hesitating, looking around, almost like she knew something was off. Eventually, we crossed back over and walked along the stream for a few more minutes. It was getting darker, so we decided to head back to the cabin. And that's when we saw it. Leaning right up against the guardrail, on the side of the road we had already been on, was this muddy little pink kid's bike. It looked like one of those old Barbie bikes, completely rusted, peeling, and caked in dirt, like it had been sitting in the creek for at least a year. The problem is, it absolutely had not been there 10 minutes earlier. We would have seen it. We were standing right there. Lila would have noticed it too. And if someone had dragged it out of the creek while we were gone, we definitely would have heard them. There was no sound, no person, no splash, nothing. We had looked along the creek. We had walked by that guardrail. That bike was not there. I keep trying to come up with a normal explanation, but I can't. The way Lila was acting, the timing, the fact that the bike looked like it had just been pulled out of the water, even though nobody was around, all of it still makes my stomach tighten a little when I think about it. So honestly, I don't know what happened. I just know that 1 minute that road was empty, and the next, there was a ruined child's bike leaning against the guardrail like someone had quietly placed it there for us to find. I need to tell you this from the heart. For a long time, my life looked like something people would only believe if it was written into a film. I spent 5 years training at the police academy, and after that, I worked for another 5 years as a police officer. On paper, it sounded respectable, stable, sensible. But deep down, I knew I was living someone else's idea of my life. My real love has always been music, I taught myself how to play the piano. I taught myself music production. Honestly, once I care about something enough, I can sit with it, study it, struggle with it, and eventually find my way through. That has always been one of my gifts. But my mother had a different plan for me. She was a beautiful woman, and I think when she was younger, that beauty shaped the way she saw the world. She made choices that left her struggling. She married young, already working as a civil servant in a small position, while my father was much older and financially prepared to build a family. My father was an Igbo man, and in our culture, family name carries weight. I was his first son. That mattered. But when things did not go the way my mother wanted, she took me away. She changed my surname. She kept me from the man who could have helped me, guided me, and maybe given me a real chance to grow into the person I was already becoming. She saw my gift for music when I was young. She knew it was there. But even though she did not have the money to support it, she still refused to let my father into my life. Instead, she remarried a man who could barely keep himself steady, let alone help build a home. But he gave her what she wanted: control. In that house, I suffered. I was neglected. I walked long distances to the cheapest schools we could find. I wore torn uniforms. I learned early how to shrink my needs so other people could pretend everything was fine. That marriage eventually ended too, but by then she had 4 more children to take care of. After secondary school, I started working in a photo and video studio. I had a plan. I wanted to learn practical skills there, earn some money, and use that money to support myself through university, or, at the very least, push my music forward. I was young, full of energy, and trying to create a path for myself. Then my mother stepped in again. She knew I was not built for a locked-up life. She knew I was someone who wanted to create, move, explore, and breathe. But she pushed me toward the police academy anyway. At first, I refused. Then she threatened not to support me in any other school. I still refused. For months, she ignored me. Then she came back, not with love, but with guilt. She asked me if I would not do it so I could help her train my sisters in school. And that broke something in me, because their father was alive. His family could have helped if she had allowed them in. But she wanted to carry everything alone, or at least look like she was carrying everything alone. So instead of letting me follow the gift that was burning inside me, she used responsibility like a chain around my neck. I entered the police academy. For 5 years, I was separated from normal life. The training was harsh. It stripped people down. It felt less like preparation and more like being locked away from myself. Then I worked another 5 years as an officer, wearing a uniform that never truly felt like mine. The first time I told my mother I could not keep carrying everything for her, she turned cold. She ignored me, even on my birthday. That silence told me more than her words ever could. Now, we do not talk. And I have finally quit the job. The day I left, I did not drive home in defeat. I drove straight toward the music center of my country. I drove toward the dream I had buried for years. I drove toward the life I believe my father would have helped me build, if only he had been allowed to know me. I cannot get those years back, but I can still choose what happens next. And this time, I am choosing my music. I never used to believe in possession. I mean, I'd hear people talk about it and I'd think, no, that's movie stuff. And if it were real, wouldn't it happen to someone far away from church? Or someone who never grew up around Catholic prayers and holy water and all of that? But lately, I don't know. I think my roommate Marla might be the one person who could make me believe. She's tiny, barely 5 feet tall, if that. But somehow, when she walks through the apartment, It sounds like furniture is being dragged across the floor. Every step lands heavy. The walls almost seem to answer her. And the strangest part is, she never seems sore, never complains about her feet or her knees. She just keeps stomping, fast and hard, all day. And she never stops talking. I don't mean she's chatty. I mean she talks constantly. Sometimes I'll be in my room and it sounds like there are 3 or 4 people in the living room having a loud conversation. Different tones, different rhythms, different voices. But when I go out there, it's only her. Just Marla, standing there, talking to herself in all those voices. Most of the time, her voice goes high and quick, like a cartoon sped up too fast. Then, out of nowhere, it drops into this low, rough sound, almost like a growl, but also like she's speaking while breathing in. When she does that, she won't look at anyone. Her eyes drift around, and whatever she says barely makes sense. One time I was trying to have a normal conversation with her, just something about the kitchen, I think. Then her face changed. Her shoulders pulled up, her arms twisted in this stiff, unnatural way, and in that deep, breathy growl she said, "She's a viper." Slowly, like every word had crawled out of her. Her eyes moved side to side the whole time. I just stood there, because what do you even say to that? When she isn't talking, she's yelling. When she isn't yelling, she's making some other noise. Humming, laughing, squeaking, singing, growling, slurping ice, sucking on candy so loudly I can hear it from my room. There is never quiet. The apartment is always full of her somehow. And she is mean. Not just difficult, not just rude. Mean in those little ways people use when they want you to know they hate you, but still want to pretend they didn't technically do anything. I left my shampoo and conditioner in the bathroom once. They were expensive too. She used nearly half of both bottles. Then she squeezed them while closing the caps, so the bottles stayed dented in, almost like she wanted me to see exactly how much she had taken. After that, I stopped leaving them in the bathroom. That set her off. For 3 days, I heard her yelling, "Get out, you bitch! Get out!" in every one of those voices. High, low, whispery, growling, all of it. Then I made another mistake. I left bleach in the bathroom, along with some laundry. You can probably guess what happened. She poured bleach on my clothes and didn't even bother putting the cap back on the bottle. Just left it there like a little trophy. The worst part is, she seems proud of it. Proud of being impossible to live with. Proud of scaring people. Proud of turning the whole apartment into a place where I can't relax, can't sleep properly, can't even walk to the bathroom without feeling like I'm entering some kind of trap. I know how this sounds. I know it sounds dramatic, but I don't know what to do. I don't have the money to move right now. I wish I did. I really, really wish I could pack a bag and get as far away from her as possible. Because Marla doesn't think anything is wrong. In her mind, I'm the problem. I'm the intruder. I'm the one who needs to leave. I just needed to say it somewhere. So there it is. So before I get into what happened, I need to tell you about an old friend of mine. I'll call her Jay. She passed away almost 5 years ago now, and ever since then, our little friend group has had these moments that feel like signs from her. Small things, strange timing, angel numbers showing up when someone is struggling. I know that might sound unusual to some people, but after a while, you start to notice a pattern. And with Jay, the pattern has always felt very specific. Last Friday, my dad passed away after dealing with several health issues. He and I didn't have the easiest relationship. There was a lot there, and not all of it was good. We thought he might pass on Wednesday night, so I went to the hospital. Everyone around me was crying, but I just couldn't. I stood there and felt this strange emptiness, like my emotions had gone quiet in another room. But he didn't pass that night. Then on Thursday, the nurses started lowering his oxygen, and we thought maybe that would be it. Again, people cried. Again, I couldn't. And again, it didn't happen. On Friday, around 1:30 in the afternoon, my brother texted me and told me my dad was gone. I left work and drove straight to the hospital. When I pulled into the parking lot, I looked at the clock. It was 2:22 p.m., and at that exact moment, Light by San Holo was playing. That made me smile a little. Whenever I'm going through something heavy, Jay has this way of sending angel numbers over and over throughout the day. At least, that's how it has always felt to me. So when I saw 2:22 with that song playing, I just had this quiet feeling that she was there with me. I went inside the hospital. I did shed a tear that time, but I still couldn't really cry. That night, family members and old family friends came over to the house. Everyone was talking, telling stories, remembering my dad in their own way. But I wasn't part of it. I sat alone near the end of the kitchen table, pretending to focus on work. Really, I just didn't know how to join in. Everyone else seemed to have memories they wanted to share, but all I could think about was how badly he had treated me. So I stayed in my little corner, quiet and separate from everyone else. After about an hour, the house phone rang. And that was strange all by itself because that phone never rings. We barely even know the number. My dad had bought it at a yard sale because he thought it was funny. It was shaped like Bugs Bunny. The landline only existed because it came with our internet package, not because we ever used it. My nephew happened to be sitting closest to it, so he picked it up, looking confused, probably because it was literally a Bugs Bunny phone. He put it to his ear, listened for a second, and then hung up. No one was there. A few seconds later, it rang again. This time, I looked up. Right next to the phone, I saw the clock. It was 10:10 p.m. Jay's birthday was October 10th, and ever since she passed, 10:10 has shown up during some of the hardest parts of my life. So I stood up, walked over to my nephew, took the phone gently, and said, "It's 10:10. This is my friend. She just wants me to know she's here." Then I hung up. The phone didn't ring again. Everyone in the room went quiet at first. Then people started saying they had goosebumps. About 15 minutes later, everyone slowly headed home. Life is strange. Grief is strange. Love is strange too, especially when it comes from places we can't explain. But I think this is what I needed to remember that night. Every day we give completely to sadness is a day of happiness we don't get back. You know, where I'm from, people talk about all kinds of spirits. Some are harmless, some are restless, and then there are the darker ones, the kind people whisper about when they mention jinn. This story is about a girl named Jacy. Jacy was very beautiful, and honestly, she knew it. She had long, thick hair that she loved more than anything. She would stop in front of mirrors, windows, even dark glass, just to look at herself. Her family used to tell her, "Don't be so caught up in your own reflection. It's not good for you." But she never listened. She could spend almost an hour brushing her hair, not because it needed that much care, but because she loved watching it fall over her shoulders. One summer, Jacy went with some friends to a wedding in a small village. It was far from the city, surrounded by old trees and empty fields. The older women there warned the girls, "At night, especially in unfamiliar places, tie your hair up. Don't leave it open." They believed loose hair could attract things you could not see. But JC laughed it off. She said she didn't believe in stories like that, and she wasn't going to ruin her look just because people were afraid of shadows. That night, she danced, smiled, and moved through the wedding with her hair flowing behind her. For a few days after she came home, everything seemed normal. Then slowly, she started changing. Her eyes looked tired all the time. She stopped talking much. She became angry over small things, and sometimes she would sit alone, smiling at the mirror as if someone inside it was smiling back at her. Her family asked what was wrong, but she snapped at them. She didn't want to eat. She didn't want anyone near her. And whenever her mother prayed or mentioned God, JC became furious. She would scream, curse, and throw things. Her mother became terrified. One morning, she went to JC's friends and cried, "What happened at that wedding? Did someone give my daughter something? Did someone do something to her?" The friends were frightened, but not completely surprised. They told her, "Auntie, we warned her. Everyone told her to tie her hair, especially in that village, but she refused." JC's mother didn't waste time. She went to her sister-in-law, and together they found a man known for dealing with spiritual problems. When the man entered the house, JC started laughing. Not normal laughter, cold, mocking laughter. She looked at her mother and said, "You brought this fool here for me?" The man asked her questions, but she only laughed harder. After a while, his face changed. He told the family, "This is not an ordinary spirit. I can't handle this. You need someone who deals with jinn." He gave them names and warned them not to leave JC alone outside. He told them to lock the doors because whatever was inside her might try to run. The next day, another medium came with an exorcist. The moment he stepped inside, he understood what they were facing. But JC was nowhere to be found. They searched the house, calling her name. Finally, after prayers and warnings, she came out from a dark corner, furious. She cursed her mother. She cursed her aunt. She kept saying they were trying to separate her from the only one who truly loved her. The medium asked for the spirit's name, but JC refused to answer. She said, "He loves me. He's the only one who understands me. Everyone else told me to hide my beauty, but he saw it. He chose me." That's when the medium told her mother something heartbreaking. He said, "She allowed him in. Maybe she didn't understand what she was doing, but she accepted him. And when a person accepts something like this willingly, it becomes much harder to remove." Her mother begged. She cried and said JC was her only daughter. She said she couldn't watch her child disappear like this. So they tried. They prayed. They reasoned with JC. They told her this was not love. They told her something was feeding on her weakness, her pride, her loneliness. But JC would not listen. She was young, stubborn, and convinced that everyone was jealous of her. She believed the jinn loved her because he praised the very thing everyone else warned her about. Before they stopped, the medium asked the spirit one last question. Why her? And through JC, the spirit answered, "I was sitting in a tree. I was not looking for anyone. Then I smelled something sweet, and I followed it. I saw her hair open in the night, moving in the air. I touched the ends of it, and through that, I entered her. It only took a few days to make her believe I loved her. Now she belongs to me." After that, the medium told the family there was nothing more he could promise. He gave JC's mother something to tie around her wrist so she would not harm herself or others. Soon after, JC's mother left the town with her. People said she moved back to a quiet village, somewhere isolated, where she could keep her daughter away from people and still care for her. Nobody really knows what happened to JC after that, but in some families, they still tell girls the same warning at night. Tie your hair in unfamiliar places. Not because every story is true, but because some doors should never be opened just to prove they aren't there. I've never really said this out loud before, but I keep wondering if anyone else has ever felt something even close to it. When I was little, maybe around 5 or 6 years old, my family spent a lot of time in my grandmother's old holiday home near Knysna, South Africa. It was one of those 2-story houses that felt much bigger when you were a child, full of quiet corners and wooden floors that seemed to remember every footstep. My brother and I shared a bedroom back then, and we had a bunk bed. I always slept on the top bunk. That was my little kingdom. And when nobody else was home, I used to do something kids probably shouldn't do. I'd climb up onto the top bunk and jump off. But the strange thing is, I never remember landing the way I should have. Instead of dropping straight to the floor, it felt like something caught me. I couldn't see anything there. There were no hands, no shape, no person, nothing I could point to. But I could feel it. It was like an invisible pressure underneath me, holding me up before I could hit the ground. And then I'd start moving. The closest way I can explain it is that it felt like I was swimming through the air. I would move my arms and legs the way a kid doggy paddles in a pool, except there was no water and I wasn't falling. I was floating, or being carried. I'm honestly not sure which word fits better. I remember drifting from room to room like that, completely alone in the house. If I wanted to go up the stairs, I didn't climb them. I sort of paddled upward, like something I couldn't see was lifting me and helping me along. This didn't just happen once. It happened a number of times over a few years, but only when I was by myself. Never when my parents were home. Never when my brother was nearby. Only in that private, quiet pocket of childhood where everything felt possible. Back then, I didn't think too hard about it. I was just a kid, and kids accept strange things more easily than adults do. But now, looking back, I can't explain it at all. It doesn't feel like a dream to me. It doesn't feel like something I imagined either. The memory is too physical. I remember the feeling of being held up. I remember the motion. I remember the air around me. I've kept it to myself for years because I know how it sounds. It sounds impossible, maybe even ridiculous. But that's what I remember. And I'm genuinely curious now. Has anyone else ever experienced anything even a little bit like that? It happened sometime in 2022, in the basement of the admin building at Cebu Normal University. There was a contractor assigned to do electrical repairs and maintenance around the campus. 2 of their workers were scheduled to do some wiring work in the basement, and I was the one who usually opened the area for them. I told them, on weekdays I'll open this before 8 in the morning. After that, I'll go back to the office. If you need me to lock it up, just let me know. I usually leave around 5 p.m. They agreed, and that became our routine for the next few weeks. Everything went smoothly at first. Then one afternoon, a little before 5, I went down to check on them. I saw one of the workers there, a guy named Marco, and I casually asked, "Boss, how's everything going down here?" He looked at me for a moment and asked, "Sir, what is this basement really?" I asked him what he meant. That's when he told me that during their first few days, there were only 2 of them working down there. One of them was assigned to another section, while Marco was working in a far corner, drilling through the wall for some wiring. While he was drilling, he suddenly heard loud banging on a door nearby. Not just a small knock, but heavy banging, like someone was hitting it hard or kicking it from the other side. So he stopped drilling. The banging stopped too. When he started drilling again, the banging came back. That was when he got scared. He left his area and went straight to his coworker. But before he could even explain properly, his coworker told him he had also been feeling strange. He said that while he was working, it felt like someone was standing right behind him, very close, almost breathing over his shoulder. But whenever he turned around, no one was there. After that, both of them went upstairs and reported it to their team leader. From then on, they decided not to work in pairs anymore. They made sure there were always at least 4 of them in the basement, and they stayed close to each other while working. That explained why I kept noticing that they were always moving around as a group whenever they were assigned down there. I just tried to lighten the mood and joked, maybe it's because that basement was used as a Japanese garrison during World War II. They say many Filipino soldiers died there. And then I added, maybe that's also why the ceiling feels so low. I told them, next time, bring a small radio or play some music so it doesn't feel too quiet down here. Maybe whatever's there was just testing you because you were new. We all laughed after that, though I could tell they were still a little uneasy. But after those first few days, they said they never experienced anything like it again. No more banging, no more strange presence behind them. It was almost as if the basement had already decided they were allowed to stay. So this happened a couple nights ago, and honestly, I'm still trying to make sense of it. Me, my girlfriend, and a few friends were out late, and after being hungry for way too long, we finally decided to grab pizza. Nothing special, just one of those late-night food missions where everybody's tired, hungry, and half laughing at everything. After we picked it up, one of my friends, Kale, said we should go eat at this park nearby. And this park is pretty hidden. Like the kind of place where you don't expect anyone to be at night unless they're sleeping there or passing through. It's quiet, tucked away, and honestly, already has kind of a weird feeling once the sun goes down. When we pulled in, there were barely any cars around. I remember seeing an older man and woman slowly driving around, and I think they were looking for their missing dog or something. Other than that, it felt empty. There are 2 playgrounds there. One is newer, smaller, and fenced off. The other one is older, bigger, and has been there forever. We went to the newer one because it felt a little safer, I guess. At first, everyone was nervous, especially my girlfriend. She really didn't want to be there. But after a while, people relaxed. We were eating, joking around, messing with the playground equipment. I was on this spinning thing, getting swung around, and for a little while it actually felt normal. Then we started hearing noises. At first it was easy to brush off. You know, trees moving, wind, maybe someone far away. But then it started changing. It sounded like humming. Then it sounded more like singing. And the second I really heard it, my whole body reacted before my brain did. I got this heavy, awful feeling in my stomach. Like dread. Not just being scared, but that deeper feeling where something in you says, leave, now. Kale heard it too. He got quiet in a way that made everybody else quiet. For context, we live in Hawaii. Most of us in the group, including me, were born and raised here, and we grew up hearing about certain things you don't mess with. One of those things is the night marchers. They're said to be spirits of old Hawaiian warriors who still move through certain places at night. People here take that seriously. It's not just some spooky campfire story to us. So when you're in a dark, empty park and you start hearing strange singing from somewhere you can't see, nobody wants to stick around and find out. We all decided to leave immediately. Everyone was freaked out. My friend got in the driver's seat, backed the car up, and we started pulling out of the lot. People were talking fast, trying to explain it, trying to laugh it off, but nobody actually sounded calm. Then, as we were driving away, I looked toward the older playground. It was maybe 15 yards from the newer one, close enough to see clearly because part of it was lit. And standing there, in the light, was this black figure. Not a person in dark clothes, not somebody walking through a shadow. It looked like the shadow itself had a shape, and it started walking toward the car. We were already moving, so it wasn't like someone just approaching us in the parking lot. This thing was coming from the old playground, and I swear it didn't look normal. I was the only one who saw it there, but then I looked toward the tree line, these tall pine trees nearby, and I saw more shapes moving between them. Not one, multiple. That's when I really started losing it. The weirdest part is, I barely remember the ride home. I know I was scared. I know everyone was shaken up. But the whole car ride feels blurry, like pieces of it are missing. Later, my girlfriend asked me something that's been bothering me ever since. She didn't see the figure, but she asked, "Was it walking toward us?" I told her yes, and the way she asked it scared me more than I expected. Because I don't know why that detail mattered so much. I mean, obviously something walking toward you is worse than something just standing there. But it felt like she knew there was a difference. Since that night, every time I dream, I see the same shadow figure from the playground. The one that was walking toward the car. And I don't usually dream, or at least I almost never remember my dreams. But now I keep seeing it. I don't know what happened to us that night. I don't know if we heard something we weren't supposed to hear, or saw something we weren't supposed to see. But I know how it felt, and it did not feel like we were alone. I'll be honest with you. This isn't really my story. It belongs to my older brother. It started in Ireland back in 1966, not long before everything in the north began to feel heavier. My two brothers, I'll call them Gavin and Evan, were only teenagers then, and for reasons only teenage boys understand, they decided they were going to cycle from Belfast all the way down to our aunt's place near Dundalk. That is not a small spin on a bicycle, let me tell you. They packed what little they had, set off full of confidence, and made their way along those old roads, stopping here and there to ask for directions. Sometimes people gave them water, sometimes milk. Once or twice, if they were lucky, they got a sandwich wrapped up for the road. Anyway, at one point, it was Gavin's turn to go and ask where they were. They had come across this long, lonely driveway, half hidden between tall hedges and a crumbling stone wall. The path was full of ruts and weeds, like no car had gone up there in years. Evan stayed back with the bikes, and Gavin started walking. He told me later that the driveway curved under these heavy old trees, the branches hanging low enough to brush his shoulders. Then, after a minute or two, the farmhouse appeared. It was exactly the kind of old Irish cottage you'd picture in your head. Whitewashed stone walls, flaking and gray in places, a sagging thatched roof, a big barn standing nearby, dark at the mouth, like it was holding its breath. And then the cats came out. Not one or two, not even 10. Dozens at first, then more and more, pouring from the barn like water from a broken barrel. Black cats, ginger cats, gray ones, skinny ones, fat ones, kittens, old toms with torn ears. They filled the yard, crying and winding around his legs as he tried to get to the front door. He said he remembered thinking, very clearly, what in God's name is going on with all these cats? He knocked. Nothing. He waited, then knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. So he went over to the window, pushing through all those cats as they pressed around him, meowing and staring. And when he looked inside, he saw something he never forgot. There were cats in the house too. Scores of them. Maybe 40. Maybe more. All gathered in a circle around a dark hole in the floorboards. They were staring down into it. Then, all at once, every single one of them turned and looked up at him. Gavin ran. He told me he had never moved so fast in his life. He tore back down that driveway with cats yowling behind him, some darting after him through the weeds. He was shouting for Evan to come and look, but Evan was already halfway down the road on his bicycle, pedaling like the devil himself had asked for a race. Weeks later, when they made it back to Belfast, Gavin told our grandmother what he'd seen. She went quiet. Then she told him he'd found the house of cats. Some people, she said, called it Whispering Ash Farm. It wasn't always there. It only appeared once every 50 years, tucked away down some forgotten road, waiting for the wrong person to come knocking. And that's the story as it was told to me. My brother's story. Though I'll tell you this much. If I ever see a long, empty driveway, an old barn, and even one cat watching me from the shadows, I'll keep cycling. Back in 2010, something happened in Bangkok that people still speak about in low voices. It was at Wat Pai Nyern, a temple that, from the outside, looked like any other quiet place of prayer. But for a while, people living nearby had noticed something wrong. There was a smell in the air. Not just unpleasant, but heavy, rotten. The kind of smell that stays in your throat after you've walked away. At first, people tried to ignore it. You know how that is. You tell yourself maybe it's trash, maybe it's an animal, maybe it'll pass. But it didn't pass. So one night in November, police came to the temple and opened a dark mortuary room. And what they found inside was something no one was prepared for. There were plastic bags everywhere. White bags, stacked and piled in the damp room. At first, officers believed there were a few hundred fetal remains inside. But as they kept searching, the number kept rising. In the end, they found 2,002. Just imagine standing there in that dim, airless space, with the lights flickering above you and the smell pressing down like a hand over your mouth. People who had to handle the bags could barely continue. Some became sick. Others had to step outside just to breathe. The remains had been wrapped, tied, and stored away, almost like they had been hidden from the world and forgotten. Investigators believed many came from illegal abortions and had been kept there for months, maybe longer. The police sealed the area quickly. Soon after, they arrested a woman suspected of performing illegal abortions, along with 2 workers connected to funeral services. And when the news spread, Thailand was shaken. People were horrified, of course. But beneath the horror, there was something else, too. A question that no one could really answer. How could so many tiny lives end up in silence like that? And then, as often happens when reality is too painful to hold by itself, folklore began to gather around the story. In Thai belief, the spirits of babies and unborn children are not always thought of as gone. Some people believe they remain close to this world. Some may become protective spirits. Others may become restless, especially if they were never honored, named, or prayed for. People began talking about Kumantong, spirit children believed by some to bring protection or fortune to those who care for them properly. Others mentioned Luktep dolls, which carry a softer, more modern idea of childlike spirits bringing blessings. But not every story was comforting. Some people said that if these spirits were neglected, they could become sorrowful, or angry, or lost. After the discovery at Wat Pai Nyern, rumors began to move through the city like smoke. Some said that in the nights before the police arrived, they heard babies crying near the temple. Not ordinary crying either. They described it as thin, distant, and aching, drifting from the dark corners of the grounds. Others claimed they saw small shapes near the mortuary, just for a second, then gone. Visitors whispered about shadows moving where no one was standing. Online, People shared dreams of wandering through abandoned temple halls, hearing infants crying somewhere nearby, but never being able to find them. Were those things real? Maybe some people truly believed they heard something. Maybe grief and fear made the mind reach for shapes in the dark. But either way, the stories spread. And then the darker legends came. There were rumors that some people tried to use fetal spirits in forbidden rituals, hoping for luck, wealth, or protection. People told stories about strange talismans, quiet rooms, and offerings left in hidden places. Others spoke of travelers staying in remote guest houses and hearing tiny footsteps outside their doors at night, or soft laughter echoing down empty corridors. And according to those stories, anyone who failed to respect such spirits might suffer for it. Sleepless nights, nightmares, a feeling of being watched, a child's cry in the room when no child was there. Even now, years later, the shadow of Wat Pai Ngern has not completely lifted. Some say cries can still be heard around the temple after dark. Some ghost hunters claim their recordings captured faint murmurs in empty spaces. Others speak of flickering lights, sudden chills, or dreams where unnamed children appear, asking for prayers. Of course, not everyone believes these stories. Some say they are only fear. Some say they are guilt. Some say they are the mind's way of trying to give voices to those who never had one. But maybe that is why this story has stayed with people for so long. Because it is not only about a terrible discovery inside a temple room. It is about what happens when something hidden is finally brought into the light. It is about sorrow, belief, and the uncomfortable feeling that some silences are not empty at all. And when night falls over Bangkok, the story of those 2002 nameless lives still seems to echo quietly. Not loudly, not clearly, just enough to make people listen. This happened to me back in 2019, and honestly, it's still one of the strangest things I've ever experienced. My sister, her husband, and their kids had come to stay with us for a few days. My place was pretty small, so there really wasn't enough room for everyone. To make things easier, I decided to spend the night at my brother Adrian's apartment, so my sister's family could have the extra room. That night, Adrian, his wife at the time, and I got to his building really late. They lived in this old apartment complex that already had an eerie feel to it, especially after midnight. Back then, they had 3 dogs, and those dogs always got super worked up whenever they saw someone they didn't see often. Since it was so late and they didn't want the barking to wake the neighbors, Adrian and his wife went upstairs first to settle the dogs down before I came up. So I stayed downstairs by myself in the hallway for a few minutes. I sat on the stairs and started scrolling on my phone, just waiting. Behind me were 2 apartment doors, facing each other across the hall, where a couple of neighbors lived. After a minute or two, I heard a sound behind me. One of the doors opened. I remember thinking it was probably just one of the neighbors stepping out, even though it was a strange time for that. But it was late spring, maybe early summer, and I figured maybe someone wanted a little fresh air or a quiet walk outside. For some reason, I didn't turn around right away. I just stayed there looking at my phone. But I could hear someone walking behind me. Slow, steady footsteps. And I could also see a shadow stretching across the floor. That's the part I remember most clearly. From the shadow, I could tell the person looked very tall, taller than me, and I'm not exactly short. The shape even looked like he was wearing some kind of hat. The footsteps came closer, and then stopped directly behind me, near the other apartment door. That's when I finally turned around. Not because I felt scared, not at first. It was more curiosity than anything. I was sitting on the stairs, and I started to wonder if I was in the way. So I turned to look, and there was no one there. No one. But just a second before that, I had heard the footsteps right behind me. I had seen that shadow on the floor, and then suddenly, nothing. Just complete silence in the hallway. I remember sitting there feeling totally confused, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Where did that person go? What had opened the door? What exactly had I seen? A little later, Adrian texted me and told me to come upstairs. The next morning, I told him everything, and he was pretty unsettled by it too. He said he'd never noticed anything strange or paranormal in that building before. But I never forgot it. It was one of the weirdest moments of my life. And sometime later, when I was in that same hallway again, I actually tried to recreate it. I used a light and stood in the same area, trying to cast a shadow onto the floor the way I'd seen it that night. I couldn't do it. No matter where I stood, no matter how I angled the light, it just didn't work. I couldn't make a shadow appear in that same spot the way that one had. And that's what still gets to me, because sometimes I wonder, maybe whatever I saw that night wasn't behind me at all. Maybe it was standing in front of me the whole time. So, a few nights ago, I was driving from work over to a friend's place, which already wasn't part of my normal routine, when my dad called me. The second I answered, I could tell something was off. He sounded really panicked, and the first thing he asked was, "Have you been home?" I live with my parents, so at first I didn't think much of the question. But then he asked again, really specifically, like, "You haven't gone home at all, right?" And I just remember feeling instantly thrown off. For a split second, I was so confused that my brain almost went somewhere ridiculous, like, wait, did I somehow go home and forget? But no, obviously not. So I told him, "No, I just left work. I'm heading to my friend's house." And then I heard my mom in the background crying. Not sniffling, actually crying. And she kept asking the same thing, whether I had come home already. At that point, my mind immediately jumped to, oh no, somebody broke into the house or something happened. But I kept telling them, "No, I haven't been home. I'm not there." And then my mom got even more upset and said, "But I just saw you." The second she said that, I got full body chills. Like every hair on my arm stood up. I didn't even know what to think. "What do you mean you just saw me?" I was confused, scared, all of it at once. So I turned around and drove straight home. When I got there, she told me what happened. She and my dad had just gotten back, and there was a package sitting by the front door. She went inside first, and from the hallway window beside the door, she saw someone coming up the front steps. She swore it was me. Same outfit I'd worn to work, same canvas bag on my shoulder, everything. She said she didn't fully see the face, just part of the body and the clothes, but to her it was unmistakably me. Then she heard loud knocking at the door, and the doorbell rang. She actually laughed and called out something like, "Hang on, I'm coming, we just got in." She thought I'd beaten them home somehow and was grabbing the package. But when she opened the door, there was nobody there. At first, she tried to explain it away. She thought maybe I'd somehow gone around through the side entrance, or come in through the garage without her noticing. But then she heard my dad come in through the garage and asked him where I was, because she had just seen me. And that's when he told her my car wasn't there, and I hadn't come home yet at all. That's when she completely fell apart. So by the time I got home, she was still crying, still shaken, still trying to make sense of what she'd seen. And honestly, I didn't know what to say, because even if you tried to explain away seeing me, what about the knocking? What about the doorbell? That's the part that really gets me. My mom has always said she's been sensitive to things like that. She grew up believing there are things in this world we just can't explain. But she's never been someone who messes with any of it or tries to invite it in. So for something like this to happen, and for it to involve me specifically, really freaked her out. And to be honest, it freaks me out too. I still don't know what it was. A glitch, something paranormal, some bizarre overlap I can't explain. I have no idea. I just know that if I came home and thought I saw my mom standing there, only to find out she wasn't actually home yet, I don't think I'd ever recover from it. Hey, my name's Franco. I'm 16, and I want to tell you about something spiritual that's been happening to me for years. It didn't start because of horror movies, but after I watched the Conjuring films, everything started to feel more intense, like whatever had been around me before suddenly got stronger. A few nights ago, around 4:15 in the morning, I woke up and saw a woman standing at the end of my bed, right in the corner of my room. My little sister was asleep beside me, so I knew right away it wasn't her. This figure was small, maybe a little over 5 feet tall, wearing a long white dress with something like a veil covering her head. She looked almost see-through, but I could still see her clearly enough to know she was there. I couldn't make out her face, and she didn't move at all. She just stood there, staring at me. The feeling in that moment was awful. It was like the whole room got heavy, and my body felt pinned down by fear. But somehow I forced myself up, grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and walked past her like I hadn't seen anything. I went straight to the bathroom and tried to act normal. That was the third time I'd seen her, always in the exact same place, always the same way. Not long before that, I had another experience that really shook me. I was lying in bed on the phone with my girlfriend, just talking like normal, when suddenly I felt this strong pressure slam down on me. It was like something was holding me to the mattress. At first I tried to laugh it off and tell myself maybe I was just tired or imagining it, but it didn't feel imagined. It felt real, physical, and honestly, terrifying. The atmosphere in my house doesn't make any of this easier. My mom and stepdad argue all the time, and there's always this tense energy hanging around. On top of that, my mom has a habit of bringing random things home that she finds outside. A little while ago, she brought in this pink scarf she found on the street and left it in my room. The second I saw it, I felt like something about it was wrong. I ended up throwing it out and asked her to please be more careful about what she brings into the house, but she doesn't really believe in any of this. My dad does, though, and so do I. When I was younger, I could never sleep by myself. It got so bad that my family took me to see a spiritual healer. They told us there were 2 spirits attached to me. They said those spirits didn't want to hurt me, but they fed off my fear. Back then, I used to have panic attacks in the dark and never understood why. One moment that has never left me was hearing a child's voice whisper, "Do you want to play with me?" I still remember exactly how it sounded. To me, it felt completely real. Now I keep a crystal pyramid in my room that my dad gave me. He told me that as long as it stays there, nothing bad can touch me. I still keep it close, and I want to believe it's protecting me. But even with that in the room, I still see the woman in the veil sometimes. So I'm sharing this because I really want to know if anyone else has gone through something like this. Seeing a woman in white, feeling watched, feeling that crushing pressure, living in a house with heavy energy, dealing with unexplained fear since childhood. I just want to understand if there's a reason for it, if there's a way it ends, or a way to make it stop. So I should probably start by saying I wasn't exactly falling apart, but I definitely wasn't cruising through life either. I got out of the Navy in 2023, and ever since then, it's just been one thing after another. We had multiple deaths in the family, including my future mother-in-law. There was my sister-in-law's wedding, then my own wedding, 2 huge moves across the country, a home renovation and sale, and then, on top of all that, I got pregnant right after our honeymoon. My husband is still in the military, so when he got new orders, that meant another move. We had a rental lined up near his new base, And on paper, it was technically legal, I guess. But in reality, it was absolutely not somewhere I was willing to live, especially while pregnant. There were missing windows with winter coming in, exposed wiring, and the whole place was filthy. It just felt unsafe. The problem was, all our stuff was already packed up and heading that way on the truck. So we had to reroute everything into storage, and I ended up moving in with my parents while we figured out a new plan. They lived in state, thankfully, but still about 4.5 hours from the base. My husband stayed closer to work and crashed with a friend from his unit for a while. Then my parents left on this cruise to Australia they'd been planning forever, so I stayed at their house to watch the dogs and keep things going. My brother still lived there too, which turned out to be a blessing, because out of nowhere, I started having eclamptic seizures. Military medical had missed the preeclampsia completely. I had to be medevaced, and my son was born at just 28 weeks, weighing 2 pounds, 4 ounces. He's doing great now, thank God. Happy, healthy, thriving. But at the time, it was terrifying. 3 months later, we finally closed on a little house of our own, and around the same time, our son came home from the NICU. My parents helped us get everything set up, helped us settle in, and then eventually they went home and my husband went back to work. And that's when things started getting strange. At first, I kept hearing crying. Not loud, not constant, just this faint, distant baby crying. Kind of vague, easy enough to brush off. I was exhausted, sleep-deprived, a first-time mom, recovering from everything, and I figured maybe this was just one of those postpartum things nobody warns you about. Then the baby monitor started picking up motion in the nursery when there was clearly nothing there. It had a camera, and every time I checked, the room looked exactly the same. No movement, no baby, nothing. I told myself maybe it was the curtains shifting or the light changing. Then it got weirder. The monitor started alerting for crying while my son was asleep in my arms downstairs. I checked all the settings, thinking maybe the microphone sensitivity was too high and it was picking up a lawnmower outside or something random like that. But then one day, I actually heard the crying coming through the monitor speaker. It sounded exactly like my son when he was uncomfortable and squirmy from gas. I looked at the screen and he was sound asleep. Or sometimes he wasn't even upstairs at all. He was right there with me. Since it was a Wi-Fi monitor, I started wondering if somehow there was interference. I even changed the password, half jokingly thinking maybe a neighbor had accidentally connected their monitor to ours. It sounded ridiculous, but honestly, it felt more believable than what was happening, so I made an appointment with a psychiatrist and just kept moving. Then one afternoon, my husband came home early. The baby and I were outside in the backyard, trying to start a little garden. He came out looking concerned and asked why I had left the baby upstairs crying. And I just stared at him, because our son was right there next to me. Then he paused. He looked at the baby, looked back at me, and you could see the confusion hit him, because he could still hear the crying. He said it was coming from upstairs and from the monitor. And I remember saying, "Oh, you hear that too?" That's actually really comforting because I was starting to think I was losing my mind. After that, he went out and bought a brand new, expensive baby monitor. And then, when it kept happening, he bought another one. Different brand, different setup, same result. We still heard this impossible baby crying. The strangest part was that it would stop if I went into the nursery and said something gentle, like, "You okay, sweetheart? Mama's here. I love you." And I know how that sounds. I really do. But whatever it was, it's happened less and less over time. These days, it's rare. We don't really have an explanation for it, and honestly, we've stopped trying so hard to find one. We just sort of live with it. And somehow, that feels stranger than anything else. Hey, I've been trying to make sense of something that happened to me a couple of years ago, and honestly, it still sticks with me. Anytime people start swapping wild smoking stories, or even when I think back on that phase of my life, this memory comes right back. So, this happened when I was in college. A few friends and I went on a hiking trip near the Appalachian Trail, around the Brown Mountain area. It was supposed to be a short trip, just 4 or 5 days, nothing too intense. The first couple of days were pretty normal. We covered a lot of ground, probably close to 30 miles each day, but we took breaks, laughed a lot, and just enjoyed being out there. On the third day, sometime in the early evening, we set up camp near a creek. The plan was to relax, maybe fish a little, eat, and settle in for the night. That's when one of my friends pulled out some edibles and offered them around. Everybody else took a small amount, something reasonable. But me, being way too confident, decided I could handle a ridiculous amount. Looking back now, I really have no idea why I thought that was a good idea. At first, everything felt fine. We had a fire going, everyone was talking, and the whole night felt peaceful. But after a while, it hit me way harder than I expected. By maybe 8 or 9 o'clock, I was completely gone. My friends were winding down and getting ready to sleep, and for some reason, I got it in my head that I should go for a walk. Back home, whenever I used to take anything, I liked walking around to clear my head. So in that moment, that felt normal to me. The problem is, I went alone. At night. In the woods. With no flashlight. Just my phone. And this is where it gets strange, because I don't remember the walk at all. Nothing. It's just blank. What I do remember is coming back to camp and seeing everybody awake and panicked. They looked terrified. I was confused, because to me it felt like I had only been gone a short while. But they told me they had been searching for me for hours. They were trying to get enough signal to call for help. They thought something awful had happened. They said when I came back, I looked mostly okay, just dirty, like I'd been lying in leaves somewhere. And apparently the first thing I said was something like, "Sorry, I was just walking and talking with some people." That's the part that's never left me. According to them, I was completely serious. I told them I had met people out there, that we sat together, talked about nature, looked at the stars, and just enjoyed how peaceful everything felt. I even told them we should go meet them, but there was nobody there. My friends said they searched in every direction they could think of. One of them even checked my last phone location, and it showed I was way off the trail, something like 45 minutes away from camp. They made it out there and still couldn't find me. And if you know anything about that area, signal comes and goes, so even getting that location at all was pure luck. What's even weirder is the direction I came back from. I didn't return from the direction I had left. Somehow, in the dark, completely out of it, I looped around and came back on the trail from behind camp, almost like I'd circled back from the day before. I still can't explain that. They said I wasn't joking when I talked about those people. I was calm, certain, like I had really been with someone. And that's what's bothered me ever since, because I don't remember any of it, but apparently I believed it completely. Over time, people started telling me how lucky I was to make it back at all. Then of course the stories started. All the legends people tell about those trails and those mountains. My friends messed around and said maybe it was spirits, or something watching me, or something stranger than I'd ever want to believe. They even joked that maybe I was protected somehow because of my indigenous roots from Guatemala. I don't know what happened. I really don't. Part of me thinks I was just unbelievably high, and my brain filled in the blanks with something dreamlike. Part of me thinks I got lucky in a way I still don't fully understand. But whatever it was, it's one of those experiences that stays with you. And even now, I still catch myself wondering where I actually went that night, and who I thought I was talking to. I've lived around strange things for most of my life, so I'm not usually easy to rattle. Growing up, it was normal in our house for things to shift on their own, go missing, or turn up somewhere that made no sense later. That part, honestly, never shocked me much. But this was different. I remember it so clearly. It was around 4 in the afternoon, broad daylight, and I was standing in my kitchen making coffee. I was on the phone with my sister, Mara, and one of her friends, just chatting like it was any ordinary day. Nothing felt off. The room was calm, quiet, completely normal. I was wearing my favorite necklace that day, a honey-colored crystal pendant on this thick silver chain I trusted because it was solid, sturdy, the kind that never broke or came loose. And then, out of nowhere, I felt 2 soft little tugs at my neck. Not hard, just enough to make me stop. So I reached up right away, thinking maybe the pendant had flipped around or gotten caught in my hair. But when I touched the chain, the pendant was gone. Not broken off, not hanging funny, gone. The chain was still clasped shut around my neck, still intact, but the crystal and the silver piece it sat in had completely vanished. I was just standing there holding an empty chain. Nothing else happened. No cold rush, no weird shadow, no sudden silence in the room. Just those 2 light tugs. I remember running my fingers over the chain again and again, trying to convince myself it had somehow slipped behind my neck or down the back of my shirt. My mind kept trying to force a normal explanation onto something that absolutely did not have one. I'd think, maybe it twisted around somehow. Maybe it fell and I missed it. Maybe I imagined the tugs. But then I'd come right back to the same question. How? How could any of that happen when I felt those 2 distinct pulls? For days, I kept doing that to myself, coming up with explanations, then quietly ignoring the one part that made all of them impossible. I ended up calling my mom because I was so shaken. And I'll never forget this. She didn't laugh, didn't question me, didn't try to talk me down. The first thing she said was, "Well, who did you upset?" And weirdly, that comforted me. My family has always been a little mystical, a little witchy, so her mind went straight to the idea that maybe something had been sent, or something had decided to make itself known. I told her I hadn't done anything to anyone. I genuinely couldn't think of a single reason. She said something that stuck with me. She told me she didn't think the tugs were necessary to take the pendant. She thought whatever did it wanted me to notice. Wanted me to know, right in that moment, that it was gone, before I could explain it away later, which is exactly what I always try to do. And she was right. Because I was standing on a hard kitchen floor. If that pendant had fallen, I would have heard it hit. It would have made a sharp little clatter. There's no way I could have missed that. And even beyond that, I still can't understand how the whole silver setting could have come off the chain without the chain opening. It wasn't one of those flimsy loops you can bend apart. It was closed, secure. There was just no physical way for it to happen. Still, even knowing that, I searched. Of course I did. My sister, 2 friends, and I went over that kitchen again and again. We checked every corner, every crack, under appliances, in drawers, in places it couldn't possibly be. I kept looking because some part of me needed the comfort of trying, needed the illusion that maybe reality still worked the way I thought it did. But we never found it. It was just gone. And that's what unsettles me even now. I believe in the paranormal. I believe there are things we don't understand. I've had other experiences in my life, strange ones, even powerful ones. But most of them, eventually, I can at least place into some kind of framework. I can live with them. This one still bothers me because I can't explain what took it. Or why? Later on, the only theory I could come up with was maybe it was some kind of guide, something looking out for me, maybe in a harsh way, because I had become too dependent on that stone. I wore it constantly. I drew comfort from it, maybe too much. At the time, though, it didn't feel protective. It felt invasive. It felt personal. I was scared, honestly. Not just because I lost something I loved, but because whatever did that could do it so easily. That thought stayed with me longer than losing the necklace itself. Because if something could take a pendant right off my body without opening the chain, what else could it do? And the strangest part is, nothing else was ever taken. Nothing like that ever happened again. Just that one necklace. Just those two gentle tugs. And then it was gone forever. I've told this story a few times over the years, hoping someone would say, "Oh, I know exactly what that was." Or at least, that happened to me too. But I've never really gotten an answer. So all I'm left with is the memory of standing in my kitchen in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, reaching for something that should have still been there, and finding only an empty chain. Let me tell you about something I still can't fully explain. For more than 20 years, my bed has sat right beside the window, and at night, I've always had a clear view outside. I know that yard. I know the way the dark settles over it, the way the motion light usually works, the little shifts and sounds that belong there. In all that time, I had never seen anything that felt truly strange. But one night, that motion light started turning on by itself. I kept watching, expecting to catch a raccoon, a stray cat, even a branch moving in the wind. But there was nothing. No movement. No reason for it to trigger. And still, it kept coming on. So I finally went outside. I stood right beneath the light and let my eyes adjust, looking out into the dark as wide and steady as I could. I stayed there for a long while, probably close to half an hour, just watching and listening. Then the light snapped on. Nothing. Not a person, not an animal, not even a shadow I could make sense of. Usually that light stays on a good while once it's triggered, but this time it clicked off after only a few seconds. Then it came on again. Still nothing. No sound. No wind shifting wrong. No feeling that someone was hiding nearby. Just emptiness. I remember thinking maybe it was something small, maybe a moth or a bug near the sensor, and I was ready to leave it at that. But then it happened one last time. At the edge of my driveway, right where it meets the road, there was a pair of boots. Just boots. No legs in them, no body above them. Just a pair of boots standing there like they had every right to be. And then, as I watched, they turned and started walking away. I could hear them too. Heavy, distinct steps. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it right at them, and I'm telling you plainly, it was only the boots, nothing else. I didn't feel terror the way most people would expect. I didn't feel awe either. What I felt first was this sharp excitement, and right behind it came this stubborn, almost defiant feeling. Like, no, we're not doing this. If something had stepped into my space, I was going to meet it head on. So I went after them. I chased those boots down the drive, and before I could get close enough to understand what I was seeing, they were gone. Just gone. I stood there, breathing hard in the dark, and told whatever it was not to come back. And that's the part that has stayed with me all these years. Now that I'm older, I see the world differently than I did then. I've spent a lot of time listening to the land, paying attention to nature, learning the way life speaks without words. I've come to feel deeply connected to the earth. In many ways, that connection has brought peace into my life. But after that night, it also felt like the natural world started pressing closer, almost too close sometimes, as if some boundary had thinned. Most things, eventually, I can make some sense of, but not those boots, not the light, not the way they moved like a shadow wearing shape for just a moment. Even now, I can still see them in my mind, crossing that strip of driveway and slipping back into the dark, leaving me with a question I've never been able to answer. I still think about this sometimes, and honestly, I've never fully explained it to myself. I was probably around 9, maybe 10, when my school took us on this evening field trip to a Space Center exhibit. Calling it a Space Center makes it sound a lot more exciting than it really was. It was mostly old equipment, display pieces, and a guided walk past retired machinery that had apparently been used in aerospace work years before. The tour started after dark, around 8:30, and where I grew up, it was fully night by then. I remember the air feeling cool, and everything looked a little more dramatic under the floodlights. At one point, the guide brought us out to this open area where they'd parked a few decommissioned machines. Two things stuck in my mind more than anything else. One was this old capsule-like cockpit, the kind you'd imagine astronauts squeezing into. The other was a big white vehicle with a huge dish mounted on the back. The closest thing I can compare it to is a utility truck or a fire engine, except painted plain white, with this large dish tilted upward toward the sky. I assumed it had something to do with tracking or communications, maybe for rockets or satellites, but I never really knew. What I do remember very clearly is that the guide told all of us kids we could climb around and play on the equipment. So naturally, everyone lost their minds. Kids were scrambling everywhere, pressing buttons, pretending to launch into orbit, shouting over each other. But before any of that started, before the other kids got their hands on anything, I saw something from that dish. A green light came out from the front edge of it and stretched upward into the black sky. And I know how strange that sounds. It wasn't like a solid movie-style laser beam. It looked more segmented than that, almost like long green bars appearing one after another, with gaps in between them. Each glowing section looked maybe a few meters long, and then there'd be darkness. Then another green section, like a dashed line climbing into the sky. It moved slowly too, not fast at all, just steadily upward, far enough that I could keep following it with my eyes. I remember freezing completely. I wasn't in a trance or anything dramatic like that. I was just so thrown off by what I was seeing that I couldn't look away. Everyone else was busy laughing, climbing, smacking buttons, playing astronaut. No teachers reacted. No other kids seemed to notice a thing. And there I was, just standing there staring up at the sky like I'd forgotten where I was. That's the part that has always stayed with me. I know I saw it. I really do. And what made it even stranger was that earlier, while we were walking over, one of the adults had asked the guide whether any of the equipment still worked. The guide said no, none of it was operational. Which made sense. Why would they let a bunch of children crawl all over expensive working machines? But I was still watching those green lights even as we started walking away from the field. I could still see them for a while in the distance. I'm in my 30s now, and I've never forgotten it. I never asked the other kids if they saw the same thing. Maybe I should have. Maybe there's some simple explanation. Maybe there isn't. I've gone over it in my head so many times. Did I imagine it? Was it some kind of reflection or something in the air, or some effect from a light source I didn't understand? Could I have been seeing something that wasn't actually coming from the dish at all? I honestly don't know. I try to keep an open mind about things I can't truly prove, one way or the other. So when I went to the show, I wasn't walking in as a believer, but I also wasn't determined to dismiss everything. I've lost both of my parents, and even though I quietly hoped for some kind of moment, I knew the chances of being picked were slim, especially from where I was sitting up in the mezzanine. Funny enough, she did come up that way at one point and read someone just a few seats ahead of me, which made it all feel a little more possible for a second. What stood out to me most, being there in person, was that the people she spoke to did not seem staged. That was the one thing I felt I could rule out with confidence. The tears, the shaking, the emotion in the room, it all felt deeply real. Now, that doesn't automatically mean everything was genuine. It could still mean she's incredibly skilled at reading people who are already vulnerable and longing to hear from someone they miss. I understand that argument completely. Since she never read me directly, I didn't leave with some big personal revelation. But I honestly thought I'd come away feeling more certain in one direction or the other. Instead, I left in this strange middle place. I can't say for sure that what she does is real, but I also can't say I saw her clearly expose herself as a fake. And if it is all an act, then she is remarkably composed and very, very good at it. The whole time, she carried herself with this steady calm. She was confident, centered, and sometimes surprisingly persistent, even when what she said wasn't immediately recognized by the person she was speaking to. Yes, there were moments where the information sounded broad enough that more than one person in the audience could probably connect to it. She even addressed that at the start, asking people not to shout out during someone else's reading. But there were also details that felt much more specific, the kind that made the room go quiet. And honestly, one thing that surprised me was this. It wasn't mostly older relatives she claimed to be connecting with. A lot of the spirits she referred to were younger, teens, young adults, even very small children. That shifted the tone in a way I wasn't expecting. It made some of the moments feel heavier and harder to explain away so easily. There were times when someone clearly didn't understand what she meant, and after a little while she would simply say she was going to leave it there and move on. She didn't really retreat from what she had said, though. Then there were other moments when someone said they had no idea what she was referring to, and she stayed with it. She'd insist the spirit was being very strong about it, and that eventually a relative or friend would help make sense of it later. Maybe that's manipulation. Maybe it is. But some of those details were specific enough that I found myself expecting her to back off sooner if she were just fishing. So I'm still not completely sure how I feel. I really am somewhere in the middle. But if I'm being honest, I think I walked out feeling like I had seen a little more in her favor than against her. Not enough to make some bold declaration, just enough to leave me wondering. And maybe that's why it stayed with me. I want to tell you about 4 things that happened to me years ago, and honestly, they still sit heavy on my mind. I've tried to make sense of them, tried to brush them off, tried to come up with normal explanations, but none of it ever fully adds up. The first one happened one night when I was out with 3 friends. We were smoking in this quiet, isolated spot between maybe 8 and 11 at night. There was only one house anywhere close, maybe a couple 100 meters away, so the whole place felt cut off from everything. At some point, out of nowhere, I got this intense urge to open my front camera and start recording, like I needed to capture what was happening before I drifted away mentally. And that's exactly what happened. I kind of zoned out. Then, maybe an hour and a half later, close to 11, I suddenly came back to myself because this huge, bright, warm light flashed right in front of my eyes. It wasn't coming from anywhere real. It was just there for a second. Then it disappeared, and everything went dark again. Right after that, the man from the nearby house started yelling at us to get out of there, or he'd call the police. We all left. What makes it stranger is that I wasn't even facing his direction when it happened. The next day, I checked the video I'd recorded. One of my friends, Kareem, was joking around, singing into his hand like it was a microphone. But when I played it back, It didn't sound normal at all. It sounded like he was singing into an actual mic with this weird echo, like it had been recorded in some studio or through speakers. The second I heard it, I panicked. I can't explain it, but I felt this overpowering need to delete the video immediately. So I did. Then later that same evening, those same friends came by again. I was standing there smoking, and without even thinking about it, I started humming the exact same song from that video. My friend froze and looked at me like I'd done something impossible. He asked me how I knew it. He said he had only written that song a few hours earlier, like that afternoon. And I had no answer for him. None. The second thing happened about 3 years later. I was out by the river with another friend, drinking and just messing around. At some point, I zoned out again. And while I was in that state, I had this really specific image in my mind. I saw myself walking home near a pharmacy in my neighborhood, and my dad pulled up behind me in the car, honked, smiled, and said, "Where have you been wandering around?" It felt vivid, but I was drunk, so I didn't take it seriously. I kept walking home. But when I got to that exact same spot near the pharmacy, I suddenly heard a car horn behind me. I turned around, and there was my dad, rolling down the window, smiling the exact same way, and saying the exact same words I had already heard in my head. That one really got under my skin. It was too exact, too precise. The third one happened a couple of months after that. I was home alone and asked a friend to bring me some beer. He dropped it off, but he had to leave right away because of a family issue. So I stayed home by myself and kept drinking. After a while, once I was really drunk, I suddenly got this strange, random thought about a very specific sexual position. I know that sounds odd, but I'm just telling it exactly how it happened. The fourth experience happened after I took a nap one afternoon. I had this intense dream where two guys from school who used to bully me were right in front of me, talking trash, getting in my face. Above me there was this oddly shaped light, something I can still picture but can't really describe properly. Then one of them suddenly grabbed me by the neck and slammed me against a wall. Right after that, I woke up. That evening, I went out for a walk. On the way back, I saw two guys from the neighborhood in the street burning tires and plastic. I told them to stop because the smoke was awful, and it turned into an argument almost immediately. Then it became a fight. And the way it happened was almost identical to the dream. One of them grabbed my arm, and the other one pressed me by the neck against a wall. I remember in that moment feeling less angry than shocked, because it felt like I had already lived it, like I'd seen it before. Thankfully, an older man from the neighborhood came by and broke it up. I went home that night completely unsettled. And even now, after all this time, I still think about those 4 moments. I still wonder what they were. Coincidence? Intuition? Hallucinations? Something psychological? Something else? I honestly don't know. I just know they felt real when they happened, and they've never really left me. I've carried this story with me for a long time, and I think I'm finally ready to say it out loud. I was about 10, maybe 11, when it happened. Back then, my dad was living in this narrow little duplex after my mom left, and from the outside, it looked like any other place on the block. Nothing special. But inside, it felt heavy. Not all at once, not from the very first day, but little by little, the whole house started to feel wrong in a way I still can't fully explain. Before the divorce, my parents fought constantly. It was loud, chaotic, painful. Things got thrown, doors got slammed, and there was this anger in the house that just never seemed to leave. My uncle was staying with us too, and years later he admitted he'd messed with something spiritual around that time. He never told me exactly what he did, only that he believed he'd opened a door he shouldn't have. Looking back, it felt like all that hurt, all that tension, made the perfect place for something dark to settle in. At first, it was small things. A door clicking shut on its own. Knocks in the middle of the night. Strange little noises you try to explain away because you don't want to believe anything else. I remember lying in bed and hearing the blinds rattle, then watching them move like someone was dragging their fingers through them. I turned off the fan, stood there listening, and it still happened. It wasn't random. It felt deliberate. One night, I woke up crying because something had hit my leg hard enough to leave a mark. I remember sitting up, confused and terrified, and seeing my bedroom door ease open on its own. Then I heard footsteps rushing down the stairs. I followed, shaking the whole way, and when I got downstairs, there was no one there. Just silence. That house always seemed to have rules of its own. If we left lights on, they'd switch off. If a door stayed cracked open, it would end up shut. It felt like the house wanted things a certain way. One afternoon, it was just me and my uncle's girlfriend at home. We were at the table making little clay figures, laughing, doing something normal for once. Most of the lights in the house were on, except for my room. Then this sound came through the house. This deep, awful scream that didn't sound human at all. It wasn't outside. It wasn't from the TV. It felt like it was coming from inside the walls. It just kept going, vibrating through everything, until I got up and closed my bedroom door. And then it stopped. Another night, I was lying in bed trying to sleep when I felt warm breath on my face. At first, I told myself it had to be my own breathing bouncing back somehow, so I held my breath. And I still felt it. Slow, hot, steady, right there against my skin. I didn't sleep a second that night. The dreams were the part that stayed with me the most. I used to have these vivid night terrors where I'd feel like I was walking through the house, except it wasn't really our house anymore. It was darker, warped somehow, like the same rooms but twisted into something meaner. I'd see these tall black shapes standing in corners or hovering near the ceiling, and they had these strange colored glows around them. Red sometimes, other times purple, or this sickly green. They never rushed at me. They just watched, and somehow that felt even worse. What scared me most was that I'd catch glimpses of them when I was awake too, not just asleep. Not sleep paralysis, not tricks of light. I knew what I saw. After a while, the fear changed. We got used to it in a way that sounds strange now. If a door wouldn't open, I'd actually talk out loud and tell whatever was there to stop messing with me. And sometimes the pressure would just lift and the door would swing open. It became weirdly normal. Not less frightening exactly, just familiar. But there was one night that finally broke whatever connection that place had to us. I'd gotten in trouble at school, so when my dad took my little brother to a birthday party at this pizza arcade place, I had to stay home. My uncle had company over and was using my room, so I ended up sleeping in my dad's bedroom, the one room everyone quietly knew was the worst. I went to bed angry and exhausted. At some point, I drifted into that half-awake state where your eyes can open, but your body still feels pinned down by sleep. I looked toward the closet and saw the light was off. Outside, the street lamp that always shone through the window was gone too. Everything was pitch black, but not normal dark. It felt like the room had slipped somewhere else entirely. Then the whole space started shaking. A horrible sound filled the room, like screaming layered over voices speaking in some language I couldn't understand. The closet door started flying open and slamming shut. Then the bathroom door. Then the bedroom door. Over and over. The air buzzed so sharply, it felt like it was drilling into my ears. I remember crying, trying to scream for my uncle, but it was like my voice was swallowed up. Time didn't feel real anymore. It felt endless. And then, in the middle of all of it, the only thing I could think to do was pray. I shouted, "God, please make it stop." And it did. Immediately. The closet light clicked back on. The street lamp outside came back. The doors stopped moving. The room went still and quiet so fast it almost made it worse. I was drenched in sweat. I ran straight to my uncle's room, shaking, asking if he heard me yelling, if he heard the doors, the screaming, any of it. He looked at me like I was crazy and said no. He said it had been quiet the whole time. He and his friend had just been sitting there playing video games and eating chips. That was the last night anything like that ever happened. Not long after, my dad started seeing a woman named Mara, and when she moved in, everything changed. She never saw anything, never heard anything, never felt that heaviness the rest of us lived with for years. We told her stories, but I could always tell she didn't really believe us. And honestly, I understood. If someone told me that story and I hadn't lived it, I probably wouldn't know what to do with it either. I still don't know why it stopped. Maybe she brought peace into that house. Maybe whatever had been there fed on all the anger and finally had nothing left to hold on to. I can't say for sure. What I do know is that I've never been the same since. Even now, I can walk into certain places, old houses, empty rooms, buildings with a strange history, and feel when something is off. It's hard to explain to people without sounding dramatic, so I usually keep it to myself. But every now and then, especially when I'm alone somewhere unfamiliar, I still get that same feeling I had as a kid. And even after all these years, I still can't sleep in complete darkness. I still remember every bit of it. So this happened on a Sunday night, and honestly, I still don't know what to make of it. My friend was supposed to come by around 8, so we could have a couple beers, play some pool, and just unwind after a long day. For the sake of the story, I'll call him Brent. I've known him for well over a decade, so this wasn't some casual acquaintance showing up. This was somebody I knew really, really well. Earlier that day, the family had been doing the whole Father's Day thing, and by that evening, the house had finally gone quiet. My wife and kids were still over at her dad's place, and I was home alone, looking forward to a calm night. At about 7:55, I heard a knock at the side door, which is the door everyone uses. I got up from the couch, walked over, opened it, and there he was. It looked exactly like Brent. Same face, same build, same way he stood. He even had this faint little smile on his face, like everything was normal. The only thing that struck me right away was that he wasn't carrying the beer he said he was bringing. So I kind of laughed and said something like, "What happened, man? You forget the drinks? Or did you finish them on the way here?" And he just stared at me. Didn't say a word. Didn't react. Just stood there with that calm little smile. I remember feeling confused almost instantly. Before I could even ask what was going on or tell him to come inside, he turned to his right, really casually, and started walking back up the driveway. That's when I noticed something else that made no sense at all. There was no truck. Nowhere. I live out in a pretty rural area, and the driveway is long and gravel, with a few places people usually park. His vehicle wasn't there. Not near the house, not off to the side, not anywhere I could see. He was just walking away like he'd been dropped off by nobody. I finally snapped out of it and called after him. "Hey, Brent, you good?" Nothing. He didn't turn around, didn't wave, didn't slow down. He just kept walking up the driveway until he hit the bend and disappeared from view toward the road. And I just stood there. I remember closing the door slowly and going back into the living room, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I picked up my phone and called him. No answer. I waited maybe half a minute and called again. Still nothing. At that point, the house felt way too quiet. You know how a house can suddenly feel different when something weird happens? That's exactly what it felt like. Then, maybe a minute or two later, my phone rang. It was Brent. He sounded completely normal, laughing even. He told me he was still on his way, but he'd gotten pulled over near the liquor store and was stuck getting a seatbelt ticket. He said he saw my calls, but didn't want to answer while the officer was standing there writing him up. I just stood there listening, trying to keep my voice steady. I told him, "Okay, yeah, come on over. We're still good." About 10 or 15 minutes later, I heard a car door shut outside. This time, I went out right away, already tense before I even reached the door. And there he was, the real Brent, holding the ticket in one hand and carrying a full case of beer with the other, grinning and joking that since he bought the beer, I should be the one paying his fine. I never told him what happened. Actually, I didn't tell anybody for a long time. I just acted normal and went through the rest of the night like nothing was wrong. Because what was I supposed to say? How do you even begin to explain that? I know what I saw. Or at least, I know who I thought was standing at my door. So this happened back in February, when my family took a trip to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. We rented this sweet little cabin tucked near a golf course, and it honestly felt like something out of a postcard. It was me, my sister, my cousin, my parents, my grandma, my aunt and her daughter, plus my brother, his girlfriend, and his dad. One afternoon, most of them decided to go out and explore the wooded riding trails nearby. So the only people left at the cabin were me, my sister, and my cousin Talia. Maybe half an hour after everyone left, the three of us were sitting around the dining table playing Cards Against Humanity, just laughing until we were crying over how ridiculous some of the cards were. The dining room had windows everywhere, probably 8 or 9 of them, and one of those windows looked straight toward the front door. The way the door was angled, you could pretty much see it clearly from the table. Right when all this started, I had gotten up to check on a batch of cookies in the oven, so I was standing in a spot where I couldn't actually see the front door anymore, but my sister and Talia could. Then we heard a knock. I remember turning, and my sister was frozen, staring at the door. Talia was looking at me with this expression I still can't fully explain. It was this mix of confusion and fear, and it immediately made me uneasy. I set down the oven mitts and started walking toward the front door anyway, just out of instinct. But before I even made it halfway there, I heard my sister call my name from the back door. And I need to explain why that shook me so badly. I could still see my sister sitting at the dining table. She had not moved. But at the same time, something from the back of the cabin had called me by my full first name. The formal one nobody in my family uses unless they're teasing me or reading off paperwork. My sister definitely doesn't call me that. She hasn't since we were kids. The second I heard it, every alarm bell in my body went off. I just stopped where I was and thought, no, absolutely not. I was not opening that door. So I turned around, sat back down, and we all just tried to ignore it, even though the whole room felt wrong after that. What makes it even stranger is that the night before, I'd already had this really unsettling experience. I had called my older cousin to vent about some drama with my ex, and while we were talking, I went outside to sit on this metal glider on the porch near the hot tub. For some reason, the cabin felt too closed in that night, like I couldn't breathe properly indoors. While I was sitting there, I looked down the hill and noticed something standing on the little golf cart bridge below me. Just standing there, completely still, looking straight at me. At first, I tried to rationalize it. I told myself it was probably just some guy, maybe somebody passing through or out for a walk. That felt easier than letting my mind go anywhere darker. But as the call was ending, this intense feeling of dread came over me out of nowhere. I can't even describe it properly. It was like my whole body knew I was not safe before my brain could catch up. I got up quietly, went back inside, and put on a movie like I could somehow distract myself from it. Then the next day, after the thing with the knocking and the voice, my family went out again. We visited an exotic car exhibit and then an aquarium, and during that whole time, everything felt normal. Nothing weird happened. I started thinking maybe I was just overreacting, or maybe the stress had gotten to me. This time it hit even harder. My chest got so tight it actually hurt. It wasn't just anxiety, at least not like anything I'd ever felt before. It was this crushing, awful sense that something was wrong, like danger was right there even though I couldn't see anything. My family noticed immediately. My parents were staring at me like they were about to take me straight to the ER, and my brother's girlfriend was leaning over the seat asking if I needed water, if I could breathe, if I wanted them to pull over. And then, just like that, it stopped. No slow fade, no lingering pain, nothing. 1 second I felt like I was being crushed from the inside out, and the next I was completely fine. My chest didn't ache anymore. The dread was gone. It was like somebody flipped a switch. That's the part that still gets me. I can handle creepy. I can handle unexplained. But whatever that was felt aware. It felt intentional. And even now, months later, I still think about that voice, the thing on the bridge, and that awful wave of fear that came over me like it was coming from something outside of me. I still don't know what it was. And honestly, that's the part that stays with you. Okay, so this happened to me and my friend Mara in the last week of October 2024, and I still can't fully explain it. We decided, kind of on a whim, to take a late-night trip up to these hot springs in the mountains. It was one of those spontaneous ideas that sounds fun at the time, you know? Just the two of us, a quiet night, a familiar trail, nothing that seemed risky or unusual. The hike itself was mostly uneventful. We did run into a few people up there who felt a little off, but nothing dramatic happened. No obvious warning signs, no scary noises, nothing like that. For most of the night, everything felt normal. And then, on the way back, everything changed. We were maybe a few minutes from the parking area. I could already see where the cars were through the trees, and I was in the middle of telling Mara some random story as we walked. And then, out of nowhere, I felt it. The only way I can describe it is that it was like stepping through some invisible boundary. 1 second I was fine, and the next, this overwhelming feeling of fear just slammed into me. Not normal fear. Not the kind where you hear a noise and get startled. I'm talking about this deep, suffocating, unnatural sense of dread that seemed to hit every part of me at once. My whole body went on alert. It felt like something in me was screaming, "You need to leave, right now." It honestly felt evil. That's the word I keep coming back to, even though it sounds extreme. It felt like walking into a place where something did not want us there. I didn't want to scare Mara, so I tried to keep talking like everything was normal. But I could hear it in my own voice that I was forcing it. I started walking faster without really meaning to, scanning the dark around us, trying to see if there was someone nearby, or some obvious reason for what I was feeling. But there was nothing. Then, as we got closer to the lot, Mara went completely quiet. A second later, she looked at me and said, really calmly, "Something feels wrong." That was the moment my stomach dropped, because I hadn't said a word to her about what I was feeling. Not even a hint. And somehow she was feeling it too. I just looked at her and said, Get to the car." At that point, we both started moving fast. Not full panic yet, but close. And when we stepped into the gravel lot, I noticed there was one vehicle still sitting there off by itself. The windows looked fogged up, and there was some kind of covering or curtain over the inside. It immediately made the whole scene feel even worse. We got into my car, locked the doors, and I asked her, "You feel that too, right?" And she said, "Yes, we need to go. Now." So I started the car and got out of there as fast as I could. The strangest part is that the second we got farther down the road and out of that area, the feeling started to lift. It was like whatever it was had stayed behind in that canyon. Once we were far enough away, we finally started talking about it, trying to make sense of it. And both of us kept using the same words: evil, unnatural, wrong. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. There wasn't some figure in the trees or a voice in the dark. It was just this crushing sense that we were in the presence of something deeply wrong, and that if we stayed there, something terrible was going to happen. For months after that, I kept checking local news and community pages, half expecting to find out something had happened there. But I never found anything. No incident, no explanation, nothing. Because even now, what I remember most clearly is that feeling, like we crossed into the edge of something invisible and hostile. Like something knew we were there, and we were absolutely not welcome. I still don't know what we walked into that night, but whatever it was, I don't believe it was human. I still think about this sometimes, even now. It happened in the winter of 2019, when I was living with my family in a quiet seaside village in northern Morocco. I was still in school back then, and every morning I had to catch an early bus because classes started at 8. The bus was never especially reliable, so I got into the habit of leaving the house a little before 7, just to be safe. One Monday morning, it was especially cold. I remember stepping outside at around 6:45, still half asleep, with that heavy silence you only get before sunrise. Our house was up on a hill, a little apart from everything else. Most of the nearby homes were only used in summer, so during the rest of the year, the area felt almost abandoned. Most days, it really felt like we were the only people there. I started down the path toward the main road, and after a moment, I noticed someone standing near the roadside ahead of me, maybe 100 meters away. The person was wearing a brown jalaba with a hooded cape, something completely normal for winter where I lived. So at first, I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe he was on his way to the mosque farther down the hill. But the closer I got, the stranger it felt. He wasn't walking. He wasn't shifting his weight. He wasn't looking around. He was just standing there, perfectly still, with his back turned to me. And I remember thinking how unnatural that stillness felt. Not relaxed, not casual, just fixed there. I kept going anyway. What else was I supposed to do? As I got within a couple of steps of him, I turned my head and looked straight at his face. And there was nothing there. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, no expression, no shape to the face at all. Just smooth skin where everything should have been. His hands were visible, and his skin tone looked completely normal, so it wasn't shadow or darkness playing tricks on me. I could see the road, the trees, the walls of the houses farther away. The light was dim, but clear enough that I knew what I was looking at. I froze for a few seconds, maybe 4, maybe 5. Long enough for that cold fear to settle into my chest. Then something in me just said, "Keep walking, don't stop." So I did. I walked past him, trying not to panic, trying to act normal even though nothing about that moment felt normal. When I finally reached the road, I looked back. He was gone. Just gone. There was nowhere obvious he could have gone in those few seconds, and I know he had been there a moment before. I'm still not sure what I saw that morning. Maybe I was exhausted and my mind filled in something wrong. Maybe it was some kind of waking hallucination. I've tried to explain it to myself in every reasonable way I can, but honestly, I still don't know. And that's the part that stays with me. You know, this happened a little over a year ago now, and I still catch myself thinking about it sometimes. I live in an assisted living community, and it's actually a pretty calm place most of the time. The residents are all different ages, probably anywhere from their 20s up to their 60s. Most of us are pretty low care, so it's not the kind of place where alarms are constantly going off, or where loss becomes routine. When someone does pass away, it really means something. It stays with people. Back then, I'd already started moving away from paranormal beliefs. I used to be really deep into New Age ideas and ghost stories and all of that. But over time, as my mental health got more stable and I got proper treatment for my anxiety and other stuff, I kind of stepped back. I became a lot more skeptical. These days, I usually assume there's a normal explanation for things, even when they seem strange at first. That's part of why this moment bothered me so much. My room was bright that afternoon. Sunlight was pouring in, the overhead light was on, and I was feeling completely awake and steady. I wasn't drowsy, I wasn't half dreaming, and I wasn't in one of those anxious states where every little noise feels huge. I was just relaxed, scrolling on my phone, having what I'd honestly call a pretty decent day. Across the room, near my mini fridge and microwave, I had some random things sitting on the counter. One of them was a long metal nail file, the kind with two ends. Pretty solid, not light or flimsy. And then, out of nowhere, I heard this sharp thud. Right after that came this unmistakable metallic clatter, like the file had been lifted up fast and then dropped. It was loud enough that I looked over immediately. At first, I figured maybe it had just fallen from somewhere. Maybe it had slipped off the top of the microwave or gotten nudged somehow. But when I went to check, I realized I was mixing it up with another tool I had sitting there, one that looked kind of similar from a distance. That other tool was still exactly where it had been. And the nail file? It had moved in a way that didn't make any sense to me. So I started testing it. I picked it up, dropped it, tried to recreate the sound, tapped the counter, even tried jostling things a little to see whether something could have caused it naturally. But that file had enough weight to it that it wasn't the kind of thing that just skitters around on its own. And no matter what I tried, I couldn't make the whole thing match what I'd heard. What made it even stranger was that the staff in the medroom next to mine, literally sharing the wall, hadn't heard a thing. So later, I brought it up to the manager. She's one of those people I trust because she's smart, grounded, and not the type to feed into nonsense. She helped keep the place steady through the pandemic in a way I still think was kind of amazing. She's usually the first person to tell me when my anxiety is turning something small into something dramatic. There had even been another time before this when I thought something weird was happening, and she helped me figure out it was just water moving through the pipes in the wall. So when I told her about the nail file, I expected her to give me another practical explanation. Instead, completely serious, she said, "Honestly, it might have been a ghost." Then she told me the building was haunted like it was just common knowledge. Apparently, she'd had her own experience. She and one of the caregivers had once been in the office when a doll suddenly shot across the room. Not tipped over, not slid, shot across the room. She said they both grabbed what they needed and got out of there fast. And I don't know. That stuck with me, and maybe that's why it still feels so unsettling. If there really are things we can't explain, Maybe they don't show up in big cinematic ways. Maybe they show up in tiny, inconsistent moments like that. Just enough to make you stop and question what you know, but never enough to be easy to prove. I've actually thought about it kind of like trying to measure how intelligent cats are. Cats don't exactly cooperate just because science wants clear data. They do what they want, when they want, and that makes them hard to study. But anyone who's lived with a cat knows they can be weirdly clever. Maybe unexplained things are like that too. Elusive, uncooperative, real enough to leave an impression, but slippery enough that the second you try to pin them down, they're gone. So this happened about 6 years ago, maybe a little less. At the time, I was living in the basement of my sister and her husband's townhouse for close to a year. It was a pretty ordinary setup, nothing creepy about it, and I've always been the kind of person who looks for the practical explanation first. One night, really late, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I started hearing this sound from under my bed. It sounded like someone breathing. Not just breathing either. Heavy, slow, deliberate breathing. At first, I honestly wasn't scared. I figured it had to be the house making some weird noise. Old places creak, vents hum, pipes do strange things. And I knew for a fact it was just the three of us in the house. My sister, her husband, and me. But the sound kept going. It was getting on my nerves more than anything, because I was exhausted and just wanted to sleep. Then I noticed something strange. The moment I got out of bed, the breathing stopped. So I stood up, turned on the basement light, and checked under the bed. I pulled out this big gym bag I kept under there, full of clothes, and looked behind it, around it, everywhere. Nothing. Just the bag. No animal, no person, nothing that could explain that sound. So I told myself, okay, fine. Maybe it's just the house. I shoved the bag back under the bed, turned off the light, and lay back down. A few minutes later, it started again. This time it was louder, heavier, like whatever it was had moved closer somehow. I sat straight up, switched the light on again, and looked under the bed. Nothing. Still just the bag. Still no explanation. And because I'm stubbornly logical, I kept trying to reason it away. I thought, it has to be some sound traveling through the floor or the vents. It has to be. So I turned the light off again and got back into bed. Then I noticed the strangest part. Whenever I shifted even a little, moved my leg, rolled my shoulder, adjusted the blanket, the breathing stopped immediately. The second I went still again, it started back up under me. At that point, I grabbed my phone and texted my group chat. Something is breathing under my bed. I even tried to record it because I knew how ridiculous it sounded. But of course, the second I moved to get my phone in position, the sound stopped. Every single time. By then, I was actually getting scared. Not panicked exactly, but that deep kind of fear where your imagination starts filling in the blanks. I remember thinking that when I stepped off the bed, something was going to grab my ankle. Still, I got up one last time and turned on the light. This time, I was determined to figure it out. I thought maybe some animal had gotten in earlier while a door was open. A raccoon, a possum, anything. At least that would make sense. I pulled the bag all the way out and searched through it. Just clothes. Then I took apart the whole bed. I checked the box spring, looked for holes in the mattress, searched every part of the frame. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So eventually, I put everything back together and had to accept that I had no answer. I turned off the light, lay back down, and after a few minutes, the breathing started again. Same spot, same heavy sound, right under my bed. And honestly, by that point, I was beyond done. I was so tired that I just thought, you know what? Whatever this is, it hasn't touched me. It hasn't done anything except keep me awake, and I'm too exhausted to care anymore. So I let the sound happen and somehow fell asleep anyway. The next morning, I woke up completely fine, and that was it. It never happened again. Not once. All I know is that for one night, in that basement, something sounded like it was breathing right beneath my bed.